Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Ethan Bell. I'm 29 years old. This happened in October of 2024, during a solo hiking trip in Oregon's Kalmiopsis Wilderness, specifically near Babyfoot Lake. Until that trip, I thought of myself as a fairly average guy with no special survival skills or harrowing backstory to brag about. I was just another freelance photographer, escaping the noise of city life and heartbreak. But what happened out there changed me forever. I'd chosen the Babyfoot Lake Trail because I'd heard it was quiet, scenic, and an ideal spot to clear my head. My dog, Rufus, was coming along. Rufus was a 6-year-old golden retriever I'd raised since he was a puppy. Ever since I lost my younger brother in a drowning accident the year before, Rufus was my lifeline, a source of unconditional love that kept me from descending into complete depression. When I set out that sunny October morning, my only plan was to capture photographs for a personal project called Oregon Alone, something I hoped would jumpstart my creativity and help me process my grief. I started hiking from the trailhead around 10 a.m. The forecast was mild, no signs of rain, so I'd packed just enough food for 4 or 5 days, along with my camera gear, a small tent, and a sleeping bag. Rufus trotted happily at my side, sniffing every shrub we passed. The trail was a bit overgrown in places, but it was well marked, and the area wasn't crawling with tourists this late in the season. It felt peaceful. The first odd thing I noticed was that my phone battery, which had been at 90% before we left the car, dropped to 20% in under an hour, despite being on airplane mode. I told myself maybe the cold temperatures at higher elevations messed with the battery, or maybe it was just old. I shut it off to save what little charge was left. I had a small GPS device too, but I didn't bother checking it just yet. The day was young and I wasn't concerned. The forest was thick with conifers and rolling hills, the sunlight falling in golden patches on the mossy ground. Honestly, I felt at peace. That first night, I set up camp by a small creek that fed into Babyfoot Lake, but still a couple of miles shy of the lake itself. Rufus and I ate a simple meal, trail mix for me, a cup of kibble for him, and as dusk settled, I started a campfire with twigs and branches I'd gathered. That was when I noticed the second odd thing. The flames briefly flickered from the normal bright orange to a strange bluish hue. I leaned closer to see if some kind of chemical or mineral was causing the color shift, but it only lasted a few seconds before turning back to a warm orange glow. I chalked it up to some weird fungus on the branches. Rufus's ears pricked up once or twice as if he heard something, but the night forest can be full of small animals scurrying about. I wasn't alarmed. Around 9 p.m., we settled into the tent and I fell asleep with the quiet hush of the wild around us. I woke up sometime after midnight, aware of the total silence. Anyone who's camped knows you usually hear something: wind, distant animals, the crackle of dying embers. But it was silent in a way that made my heart pound. Even Rufus, normally a light sleeper, was sitting bolt upright, ears at attention. I unzipped the tent a few inches. It was pitch black, but the silhouette of the trees against the night sky looked different. Almost crowded, as if they had moved in closer. The hair on my arms stood on end. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Someone whispering my name. Ethan. It was so soft I had to question if my mind had conjured it, maybe mixing up the night wind with the ache of my grief. Then it came again, a little louder, more insistent. Ethan. My throat went dry. Rufus let out a low growl and crawled closer, pressing his body against my leg. I zipped the tent shut, my heart hammering. I sat, listening for a few minutes that felt like hours, but the whisper didn't come again. Eventually, exhaustion overcame terror, and I drifted off. In the morning, I awoke to find my tent's zipper on the inside partially opened as if someone had peered in during the night. It gave me the creeps, but there was no sign of footprints, no scattered gear. I wrote it off as my own half-awake mistake. Maybe I'd done it in my sleep. I was more concerned about my phone, which was now completely dead. I pulled out my GPS device, only to see that it was flashing an error code. I tried turning it off and on, but it didn't fix the problem. Great, now I was off-grid for real. I gathered my tent and started hiking toward the lake. The path was noticeably more confusing than it had been on paper. Fallen logs, areas that had burned from previous forest fires, and overgrown brush forced me to check my paper map multiple times. Oddly, the landmarks around me didn't match up to the distances marked. I'd walk for what felt like half an hour, only to come across the same gnarled, lightning-struck tree. It was an old pine, bleached white as bone, with a hollow in its trunk. I'd pass it, head west, climb a ridge, but the next time I dropped into a ravine, the same blasted pine was somehow there again. Either there were multiple identical trees, or I was going in circles. At around noon, I heard a human voice somewhere behind me. That was the first real relief I felt since last night's whisper. I followed the echo of chatter through the trees and soon stumbled upon two other hikers at a small clearing. One was a man around my age, tall, with a friendly face and an easygoing laugh. His name was Tyler Nash, 32 from what he told me. He had short brown hair, a day's worth of stubble, and a warm, energetic presence. The other hiker was Megan Rowe, 27, quieter and more cautious. She had dark hair tied in a messy ponytail and wore mirrored sunglasses that reflected my tired expression right back at me. We did that typical hiker greeting, wary but relieved to see each other in such a remote spot. Tyler immediately patted Rufus. He seemed like he had more experience with backpacking. Megan just gave me a nod and forced a small smile. "Man, I'm glad to see another person out here," Tyler said, gesturing around at the wilderness. "We've been a bit turned around. Are you heading to Babyfoot Lake, too?" I admitted that I was trying to, but something felt off. The trail wasn't matching my map. Megan snorted softly. "You too?" she asked. "We've been circling. Our GPS died and our phones are useless. Haven't had a signal in 2 days." She shrugged. "Actually, my phone shut off completely last night, even though it was on 70%, just poof, dead." We spent a few minutes comparing maps, which only deepened the confusion. The ridges and contour lines on their map were slightly different from mine, even though they both supposedly covered the same area. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck, perplexed. Megan stared hard at the outlines of the topography, occasionally glancing at the tree line as though something out there might leap at us any second. "Look," Tyler finally said, "we can try to push forward together. Better chance we won't get lost if there are 3 sets of eyes and a good dog." Since I wasn't keen on solo wandering in those strange woods anymore, we decided to team up. Rufus seemed comfortable enough around them, so that felt like a decent sign, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved. Something about that whisper last night was still lodged in my mind. We walked for another couple of hours, crossing small streams and carefully climbing over fallen logs. Tyler kept up a steady stream of chatter. He told me about his background in outdoor gear sales, how he'd been itching to tackle a big wilderness hike before winter. Megan was more reserved, only answering direct questions. I got the impression she didn't completely trust me, but maybe she was just cautious by nature. Around mid-afternoon, we found a half-decent campsite near a meadow dotted with wild grasses and stunted pines. We decided to set up there for the night. It looked like it had been used by hikers before. There were fire-blackened rocks arranged in a circle, and some flattened areas suitable for pitching tents. I went to fill my water bottles at a nearby creek while Tyler collected firewood. Megan stayed behind to organize gear. The moment I bent down at the creek bank, I got the strangest sense of being watched. My skin crawled. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind me, but it was just the empty woods. Rufus was crouched next to me, ears pinned back. A chill breeze passed through the trees, making the branches sway. I heard the faintest laughter on the wind, a child's laughter, or maybe it was just the wind squealing through the branches. That night, the three of us built a nice, sizable fire. Tyler joked that it was a miracle we got it lit because some of the wood he'd collected felt odd, like it was greasy. The weird flame colors showed up again. A bluish-green flicker, here and gone in seconds. Megan pulled out a half-charged flashlight to check the wood, but there was nothing visibly unusual about it. We talked a bit, exchanged stories about our worst camping experiences. I tried to push away the memory of losing my brother by the water. Something about being near this forest, with its deep shadows, threatened to dredge up that old guilt. If I'd been paying attention, he might not have drowned. That's the thought that always haunted me. I forced my mind off the topic. Tyler described how earlier that day he could have sworn the sun didn't move for half an hour. I checked my watch, he said, and it was 2:15 p.m. Then it felt like we walked for at least an hour, but my watch said 2:20 p.m. Maybe I'm just losing it, but Megan noticed it too. She nodded silently, arms crossed. "Something is strange about this place," she whispered. "I can't tell if it's an illusion or if we're just out of sorts." They wanted to press on in the morning toward Babyfoot Lake. I agreed. We were determined to see it through, but we decided that if we still couldn't find the right path, we'd turn around by the next night and force our way back to the trailhead. The map confusion and electronic failures were too big of a red flag. Before long, we retired to our tents. I lay there with Rufus curled up beside me, staring at the faint silhouette of the pine trees against the starry sky through the tent's mesh window. For a few minutes, I thought I could hear voices drifting from Tyler and Megan's tent, but I couldn't make out any words. My eyelids grew heavy, and eventually I slept. I don't know what time it was when I woke up to the sound of Megan screaming. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, nearly tearing the zipper. Rufus jumped up, barking wildly. I grabbed my flashlight and tore out of the tent in time to see Megan standing outside her own tent, pointing toward the tree line. She was shaking, hair plastered to her sweaty forehead, eyes wide with terror. Tyler stumbled out after her, looking just as alarmed. "What happened?" I gasped, shining my flashlight at the dark forest. Megan's voice trembled. I heard something crawling around the tent. I looked out the window and saw it, like a woman or an animal, I'm not sure. It was moving backward on all fours, circling us. Then it disappeared." "It's gone now," Tyler murmured, stepping closer to her. His eyes searched the darkness. I didn't see anything. She woke me up screaming. I didn't see or hear anything either. Eventually, we reasoned it must have been an animal, maybe a raccoon or a coyote that startled her, or a trick of her half-asleep mind. But the fear on her face was genuine. None of us slept well after that. When morning came, I discovered all our sleeping bags had been unzipped from the inside, except we'd each zipped ourselves in. Megan and Tyler swore they didn't do it. I knew I hadn't, and Rufus obviously couldn't. More perplexing was that nothing in our tents was stolen or disturbed. It was as if someone just popped in, silently unzipped them, and vanished. To make matters worse, half of our food had spoiled. My granola bars were fuzzy with mold that seemed to have grown overnight. Tyler's jerky was slick with greenish slime. Megan's trail mix smelled rancid. That left us with maybe a day or two of edible rations combined. We decided we'd have to make a push out of these woods as soon as possible. Tyler thought we should keep going forward in hopes of finding the lake, or maybe a more established trail to lead us out. Megan, her eyes still haunted, offered no argument. So we set off, each of us slightly on edge. That morning's hike had a bizarre, dreamlike quality. The forest was oppressively still. At times, the three of us would pause, convinced we'd heard a human voice or a footstep behind us, only to find nothing but the undergrowth. The light through the canopy felt dimmer than it should have, as if a permanent cloud hung overhead. We trudged forward, crossing shallow creek beds and climbing rocky slopes that didn't appear on our maps. Late in the afternoon, maybe around 4 p.m., though our watches were beginning to display contradictory times, we finally emerged onto the shores of Babyfoot Lake. It was eerily still, without even a ripple on its dark surface. The surrounding forest pressed in close, the pines leaning over the water as though listening for something. There was no sign of other hikers, no campsite, no sign that people came here at all. Relieved that we'd at least found a recognizable landmark, we decided to camp close to the lake's edge. Tyler collected more wood while Megan and I set up 2 tents. Mine was maybe 20 yards from theirs, near a small outcropping of smooth stones. Rufus padded around sniffing anxiously. He seemed as uneasy as we were. When Tyler returned with a pile of branches, I couldn't shake a strange feeling about him, some intangible difference in his expression. He was smiling, but it felt too wide, too forced. His eyes were just a bit off, as though he couldn't focus on me. Megan noticed too because she gave me a questioning look as he busied himself with the fire pit, humming tunelessly. While the sun still had some light, Megan fished out a small pot and heated water for the last of our edible supplies, some dried soup mix she had. We ate quietly, the tension hanging thick. Suddenly, Tyler broke the silence with a laugh that made Megan and me jump. "You know," he said, stirring the soup absent-mindedly, "I think we're finally making progress. After tonight, we'll just circle around the lake, find that trail that leads south. We'll be out of here in no time." "Circle around which side?" I asked. "My map shows 2 possible routes." He stared into the fire, still smiling. "Does it matter?" Megan's eyebrows knitted. "Tyler, you okay?" His head snapped up too quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. Never felt better, Meg." She visibly shuddered at the way he said her name. A second later, Tyler seemed to catch himself, shaking his head as though waking from a trance. Sorry. Tired. Let's get some rest, huh?" Megan and I exchanged a concerned glance, but neither of us pressed it. Tensions were high enough. As twilight deepened, we doused the campfire except for some embers. We wanted to be safe from forest fires. Then I brought Rufus inside my tent, zipped up, and tried to sleep. But I heard Megan and Tyler talking heatedly in hushed voices before they finally went silent. I woke up sometime later to another horrifying sound. Megan screaming again, but this time it was a howl of pain, not just fear. Rufus was already barking in panic. I unzipped the tent flap, stumbling out into near-total darkness. I tripped over a rock, scrambled up, then aimed my flashlight at Tyler and Megan's tent. It was partially collapsed, as if someone had torn down one side from the outside. Megan was on the ground, a few feet away, clutching her arm in agony. Her face was contorted with pain, and her forearm was bent at a terrible angle. She was shrieking, "Get off me! Get off me!" Tyler was on top of her, or something that looked like Tyler. He had her pinned down with unnatural strength, his face a mask of vacant rage or mania. When my flashlight fell across him, his eyes reflected back like an animal's at night. He jerked his head up. His smile was crooked, his mouth opened as if he might speak, but all that came out was a guttural hiss. Without thinking, I lunged forward. I was never a fighter, never been in a real brawl in my life, but adrenaline took over. I grabbed Tyler's shoulder and tried to yank him off Megan. He spun, snarling, and swung at me with an open hand. The force slammed me back, knocking the wind out of me. My flashlight clattered to the dirt, casting erratic beams across the scene. "Tyler, stop!" I shouted, coughing, trying to get my bearings. I crawled forward, searching blindly for something, anything I could use as a weapon. Meanwhile, Megan moaned in pain. Her arm looked mangled, but she was kicking at Tyler's stomach, screaming for help. The next instant, my hand closed around a metal tent stake. I scrabbled over, half on my knees, half crawling, and drove the stake into Tyler's side with as much force as I could. He let out a shriek, this unearthly, piercing sound that vibrated in my skull. Dark fluid oozed around the stake, thick and tar-like, nothing like normal blood. Tyler staggered off Megan, lurching a few steps away and ripping the stake free with horrifying calm. He turned to me, eyes wide, mouth twitching into a grin that didn't look remotely human. Behind me, Rufus barked frantically, then yelped and backed away. I seized the moment to grab Megan under her good arm, hauling her up. "We have to go," I gasped. She clung to me, sobbing, but managed to stand. Tyler, or the thing that wore his face, tottered, holding his side. Then he coughed up a mouthful of that thick black fluid. My mind reeled. Was he possessed? Infected? Nothing made sense. We staggered away from the ruined tent. For a second, the darkness swallowed us. My flashlight was back by the tent stake, but Megan still had her small flashlight strapped to her belt. She used her trembling good hand to switch it on. The beam flickered, revealing Tyler behind us, his torso jerking, body contorting unnaturally. He craned his neck, letting out a sputtering hiss that dissolved into a choking, gravelly laugh. Then he scuttled off into the trees, moving on all fours. We wasted no time. We ran, or stumbled, really, away from the lake. We didn't know where we were going, but we had to put distance between ourselves and that thing. Rufus bounded after us, whining. My entire body was a storm of adrenaline, my mind racing with a million questions. I kept telling Megan to hang on, that we'd find a place to hide or a safe route out. She was in shock, moaning with every step. Her left arm dangled, presumably broken. Finally, after what felt like an hour of staggering through dark, tangled undergrowth, we collapsed on a slight incline under the spreading boughs of an ancient pine tree. The night was so black I could barely see my hands. Megan let out ragged sobs, pressing her face into her good arm. Rufus whined, licking her leg as if trying to offer comfort. "We have to keep going," I whispered, but she only shook her head, tears streaking her face. "Ethan, I can't move like this. My arm," she sobbed. "What? What was wrong with Tyler? That wasn't him." I had no answers. I was shaking from adrenaline and terror, still trying to process how I'd stabbed another human being, and how it bled tar instead of blood. Time lost all meaning out there. It must have been after midnight, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., but my watch showed 11:41 p.m. No matter how I tapped the screen, the minute hand didn't move. Or it jumped forward a few minutes, then froze again. I whispered shaky reassurances to Megan, though I didn't believe them myself. I couldn't patch up her arm properly out here, not in total darkness. I cradled her, trying to keep her from going into shock. Eventually, we decided we couldn't just wait for Tyler, whatever he'd become, to come back and finish us off. We got to our feet again, ignoring the pain and fear, and groped our way through the forest. Rufus stayed by our side, though his ears were pinned back. and he kept glancing behind us. Twice, I thought I glimpsed a human silhouette flitting among the trunks, but it was never more than a flicker in my peripheral vision. Every time my gaze snapped in that direction, there was nothing but darkness. Then we heard that whisper, "Ethan, come here." I froze in my tracks, breath catching in my throat. It was the same whisper I'd heard that first night, only now it sounded like my dead brother's voice. That voice was so achingly familiar that for a split second I felt an overwhelming urge to follow it, to see him again. But then Megan squeezed my hand, bringing me back to reality. Rufus growled low and deep. We pressed on. We must have wandered aimlessly for another hour. At one point, a branch snagged Megan's injured arm, and she nearly fainted from the pain. We stopped to catch our breath, propping ourselves against a mossy boulder. I tried to comfort her, but fear had hollowed out my stomach and I had no illusions we'd be rescued anytime soon. My mind tried to piece together what could be happening. A disease? A hallucination? I couldn't make sense of it. That was when Rufus suddenly bolted away from us, barking into the shadows. "Rufus, no!" I shouted, stumbling after him. Megan hobbled in my wake, breathing hard. We lost sight of him. We tried to follow his barks, but the night swallowed the sound all too quickly. We ended up in a small clearing where the moonlight created a faint silver glow, but no sign of Rufus. We spent the next 20 minutes calling his name. Nothing. The forest was dead silent again. Eventually, the earliest glow of dawn lit the sky. Megan slumped against a tree trunk exhausted, while I circled the clearing, searching for footprints, dog tracks, anything. That was when I saw a faint trail of footprints in the soft earth. Paw prints with something weird about them, like there were extra toe pads or the gait was off. They led deeper into a thick stand of undergrowth, then vanished. We made the painful decision to keep moving without Rufus. Megan needed medical attention, or at least a chance to splint her arm properly. My mind wouldn't stop picturing Tyler's tar-like blood, or that monstrous grin. Was he still out there waiting? After sunrise, the forest became less frightening, but no less bizarre. Trees that should have taken us east led us in circles. Fallen logs we'd crossed an hour earlier reappeared in front of us, as though the forest rearranged itself. Megan's flashlight and my watch were both stuck on the same time, 3:14 a.m., yet the sun was clearly rising above the horizon. We finally stumbled onto a narrow footpath that looked somewhat maintained. It led us to a short ridge. Standing atop it, we could just make out the reflective shimmer of water far below. Another lake. Babyfoot Lake, or maybe a different body of water entirely. Clutching at hope, we followed the path. I'm not even sure how long we walked. Time had become a meaningless concept. Eventually, we reached a strange clearing where the ground sloped gently down into a broad depression. In the center was a small open-sided structure like a crude shelter made of lashed branches and animal hides. A rancid smell wafted toward us. Megan gagged, pressing her face into my shoulder. I peered inside the structure, bones, piles of them, some small, some larger. I saw at least one femur that looked unsettlingly human. Skulls, both animal and possibly human, were arranged in a kind of twisted shrine. Stained feathers dangled from cords. My heart thundered. This must have been some kind of lair. That's when I noticed something else, a tuft of golden fur near one of the skulls. "Rufus," I whispered, horror gripping me. "No." My stomach turned. Megan shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "Ethan, we have to go, right now." But before we could move, we heard footsteps behind us. Soft, shuffling. And then there was Rufus, stepping into the clearing. Relief and terror tangled in my chest. He looked mostly unhurt, save for a cut on one of his ears. He wagged his tail once. I rushed forward. "Rufus!" He cocked his head, stared at me blankly for a moment, then wagged his tail again once. Megan murmured, "Ethan, something's not right." The dog approached slowly, almost stiffly, as if unsure how to move. His eyes locked on mine. He didn't blink. Normally, Rufus would be all over me, whining in excitement, licking my hand. But this dog just came closer, then sat, tail thumping once on the ground, a slow, unnatural rhythm. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. Was it him? Was it some kind of hallucination? Rufus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I swear, for a split second I thought I saw something move behind his eyes, as if peering out from inside. Then his tail wagged once more. Thump! I heard a snap of a twig to my left, and there, emerging from behind a tree, was Tyler, or the thing that wore his face. His shirt was stained black with that oily residue from the wound I'd given him. His expression was slack, lifeless. A wide grin stretched across his cheeks, and something like a small bone amulet hung around his neck. He moved in a disjointed, puppet-like manner. He spoke in a voice that resonated like an echo in a cavern. "You should have stayed away." Megan let out a whimper. I clenched my fists, adrenaline surging. "Stay back!" I shouted, though I had no weapon aside from the small folding knife in my pocket. Tyler's grin wavered. A flicker of recognition or pain passed over his features, like the man inside was fighting back. But when he spoke again, it sounded like multiple voices speaking at once. "The forest claims your bones. The forest claims your blood." Rufus whined, stepping closer to me. This time, I noticed a wound on his side that looked like a deep scratch, scabbed over with a blackish crust. Megan grabbed my shoulder. "Ethan, we should—" Her words died in her throat as a figure emerged from the shelter. An old woman, or what looked like a woman, dressed in ragged skins and cloaks made of bone fragments. Her eyes were sunken, her teeth too long. She reached out a crooked hand toward me. Her voice slid through the clearing like a whisper of leaves. "Ethan," she said, in the exact same voice as my dead brother, "come here." I nearly buckled at the knees. Hearing the voice of someone I loved, lost too soon, coming out of this horrific entity was a blow to my sanity. Megan gasped, tears leaking down her face. Tyler's possessed body seemed to jerk in response, as if directed by the woman's silent command. He lurched forward, stumbling over the uneven ground. I pulled out my folding knife, though I knew it'd be no match for whatever power she wielded. The hag, Marla, or so my mind conjured, stepped closer, her stringy hair swaying. She had a pungent odor of earth and decay. When she spoke again, it was in 100 voices. My brother's, my mother's, Megan's, Tyler's, childlike whispers, old men's rasps. "You lost him, Ethan. You let him drown," she crooned. "But I can give him back to you. Let me wear you." "Stay away from him," Megan shouted suddenly, stepping forward despite her broken arm. I admired her courage, but that was when Tyler struck, his eyes rolling back in his head. He grabbed Megan by the neck, hoisting her off the ground with inhuman strength. She kicked and flailed. "No!" I yelled, rushing forward. I slashed at Tyler's arm with my knife, but he barely reacted, only let out that guttural hiss. He flung Megan aside as if she weighed nothing, and she hit the ground hard, her cry cutting off abruptly. She lay there, dazed or unconscious. I turned to Rufus in desperation. My dog was standing rigid, ears back, teeth bared, but I realized with a stab of horror that I couldn't be sure he was on our side anymore. There was something all wrong about the way he stood, the way he stared without blinking. Yet, he hadn't attacked me. Maybe, just maybe, it was still him underneath. The hag glided closer. "I'll show you wonders beyond this world," she hissed, her bony hand inches from my face. "Let me inside your skin." Panic and revulsion churned in my stomach. I slashed out wildly, catching her arm. Her skin felt like old leather, and she shrieked in a chorus of voices. A black ichor seeped from the wound. She snarled. Tyler lunged at me from the side. We both stumbled onto the ground, rolling. I fought him off, but he pinned me, breath hot and foul in my face. He tried to wrench the knife out of my grip. My free hand groped blindly for anything, found a nearby rock. Summoning every bit of strength, I cracked it against the side of his head. Once, twice. His body went limp, falling sideways, though something still twitched beneath his skin. I scrambled up, breathing in ragged gulps, just in time to see the hag hobbling away, cursing in a language I didn't recognize. She raised her hands, and the shadows seemed to stretch. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I nearly collapsed. The clearing itself flickered as if time were stuttering. The morning sun turned to dusk for a heartbeat, then back to morning. I lost all sense of reality, my surroundings swirling. That's when Rufus lunged at the hag, growling savagely. She shrieked, swiping at him with a knife of carved bone that appeared in her hand. He dodged, snapping at her, teeth clamping on her cloak. She half-turned, trying to fling him off, but he hung on, tearing at the fabric. "Rufus!" I cried, not sure if it was truly my dog or some puppet, but the flash of protective fury in his eyes convinced me. In that moment, it was him all right. He was trying to save me, or to take revenge on the thing that had corrupted this forest. I seized the opportunity, lunging forward with my folding knife. The hag tried to whirl around, raising her bone blade, but I ducked under her arm, slicing deep into her right leg. She let out a shriek that rattled my teeth. Rufus leapt aside just in time to avoid her wild swing. She fell to one knee, black fluid pouring down her leg. Her voice boomed in a cacophony, echoing in my head. "I will devour your soul." I didn't waste a second. I snatched up a discarded branch from the ground, one of Tyler's earlier gather, still caked with pitch. I jammed the branch into the embers of a small fire pit near the shelter, igniting it. The flame danced, oddly tinted blue again. Summoning everything I had, I rushed the witch and thrust the flaming branch at her cloak. It caught in an instant, the dry cloth erupting into an angry blaze. She screamed, high and piercing, her hands clawing at the fire. The stench of burning hair and rotted hide choked the air. I almost felt pity, but the memory of Megan's shattered arm, Tyler's face contorting, the bones in the shelter kept my resolve firm. I backed away, my heart pounding, waiting to see if she'd burn to ash or do something even more nightmarish. The hag shrieked again. Through the curtain of flame, I caught a glimpse of her face melting, warping, her features shifting from old woman to a stag-like skull, then to some reptilian snout, flickering through shapes like a carousel of horrors. Finally, the flames consumed her. Her screech grew faint, trailing off into a susurrus of wind. Then she was gone, leaving behind a pile of scorched bones and a stench that clung to my nostrils. Tyler's body collapsed, as though strings that held him up were severed. I hurried to Megan's side, dropping to my knees. Her breathing was shallow. I shook her gently, panic surging. Her eyes fluttered open. "Megan, hey, hang in there." She grimaced, her broken arm cradled against her chest. "Is it over?" she croaked. I glanced around. Tyler lay motionless a few yards away, the black fluid slowly seeping from his side and the head wound I inflicted. There was no sign of life. The bone shelter was collapsing in on itself, as if the energy that bound it together dissipated. I wiped a sweat from my brow. "I think so. Let's get you out of here." My voice shook. Rufus let out a faint whine and limped over, favoring his scratched side. Some part of me wanted to shower him with relief and affection, but I still felt uneasy. Was he truly back to normal? Something in his gaze was exhausted, haunted, but I trusted him enough to let him sniff Megan's face. She managed to smile weakly at him. I tried checking Tyler's pulse, nothing. He was gone. I felt a pang of guilt and horror. I'd stabbed and beaten him, but it wasn't him anymore, was it? Part of me hoped he found some peace in death, free from that possession. Megan trembled as we stood. Neither of us spoke. We both knew we had to leave this clearing. We started walking, me supporting Megan, Rufus limping alongside us, heading downhill in any direction that didn't lead us back to the bone shelter. The forest remained strangely quiet, but shafts of morning sunlight began piercing the canopy. Maybe the witch's death had broken her hold on this place. Or maybe it was just another trick. I didn't dare let my guard down. Time still felt slippery. My watch was cracked. Megan's flashlight flickered, showing random numbers. We just walked, ignoring the sense of being lost. Somehow, after what felt like hours, we broke through the tree line onto a dirt road. A battered sign indicated it was a service road leading to a ranger station. The wave of relief that crashed over me was almost too much. I practically carried Megan the last quarter mile. When we reached the small ranger station, it looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, no vehicles in sight. But it was a sign of civilization, at least. At the end of the road, we saw something even better, a paved highway. I can't describe the joy of stepping onto that asphalt, seeing a yellow dividing line and scuffed guardrails. We followed it until we finally found a rest area with a public phone. I don't know how long it took. It might have been an hour or several. By the time we stumbled up to the phone, Megan could barely stand. I had to punch in 911 for her. My hands were shaking, sticky with dried sweat and grime. We ended up collapsing near the phone booth, huddled together, half sobbing, half laughing with relief. Rufus lay down, resting his head on my knee, breathing heavily. There was still something off about him. He wouldn't bark or lick my face, but he seemed protective, as though he was determined to guard me. Emergency services arrived, though it took them quite a while. They found Megan's broken arm, multiple lacerations, and signs of severe trauma. They found me dehydrated, exhausted, with minor cuts. They asked about what happened, and we tried to explain, but how do you tell people about a witch that bleeds black tar and manipulates time? We gave them the basic facts about being attacked, about a friend named Tyler who didn't make it, about becoming hopelessly lost, about the illusions. Maybe they didn't believe all of it, but they took our statements. A search team went in. They found signs of a campsite, but no remains of a bone shelter. I never heard if they found Tyler's body. I was treated for shock and mild hypothermia. Megan's arm was set in a cast. She refused to talk about the details to the doctors. She just kept repeating that we needed to get as far from those woods as possible. Rufus had a cut that needed stitches. He received them at a local vet, though the animal hospital staff said he had a strangely high red blood cell count, like something was off in his blood work. Nothing conclusive, just odd. It's been several months since that day. Megan and I have each tried to move on, though we email occasionally. She lives up near Portland now, recuperating with her sister. Rufus is quieter than he was before, prone to staring at the walls. Sometimes at night I see him standing by the window, ears pricked, as though listening to something outside. He refuses to eat from his old dog bowl. He never barks, not even at passing cars or mail carriers. I try to love him the same, but there's a small, gnawing part of me that wonders if he's really the same dog who went into those woods. I developed the film from my camera. It's an older model that doesn't rely on electronics, once I got home. All the shots from the trip, landscapes, random pictures of Rufus, A photo I'd taken of Tyler and Megan were gone. The negatives were blank, except for one frame. That single image showed me sleeping in my tent, my face serene, the perspective from only a few inches away. I certainly hadn't taken it. My arms were under the sleeping bag, my eyes closed. The date stamp on that frame was impossible. October 13th, 2027. 3 years in the future. I keep that negative hidden in a drawer. I can't bear to look at it for too long. Some nights, I dream I'm still out there in the Kalmiopsis wilderness, the trees pressing in. I dream of hearing that whisper again. "Ethan, come here." And I dream of the hag, half burned, lunging out of the darkness in Tyler's face, or wearing Rufus's fur like a suit, beckoning me to give in. Other times, I dream that time has stopped for me entirely, and I can never leave those haunted woods. For a moment, I wonder if the witch is really gone, because in the quiet corners of my home at night, I sometimes sense a presence, feel a whisper at my back. But no matter how fast I turn around, there's nothing there. And though I tell myself I survived, that I escaped, there's an emptiness I can't fill. Like something was taken from me out there, part of my soul left behind under the canopy of impossible trees. So, that's the story of what happened in October 2024, near Babyfoot Lake. Believe it or don't, I'm past caring. I just know that I wake up every morning with a lingering sense of dread, waiting for the day the forest comes to reclaim me. Because I know, deep down, that what we killed wasn't just an old woman in a bone cloak. She was something older and darker, something that's been part of those woods since before they had a name, and I doubt something that ancient truly dies. If you ever find yourself out there, near that quiet, mirror-still lake, and you feel like the trail is changing beneath your feet, if your GPS fails and your phone battery drains in minutes, stop. Turn around, go back, don't stay the night. Because if you do, you'll hear her whisper in the wind. You'll feel the forest rearranging itself, drawing you deeper. And you might lose more than your way. You might lose yourself. Oh, one. My name is David Keller. I'm 33 years old, and this happened in late October of last year. I live in Eugene, Oregon, and while I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors, I'm not a survival expert or a veteran. I'm just a self-employed graphic designer who likes the quiet of the woods. But after what happened to me at Indigo Creek in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, I don't think I'll ever find peace in the wilderness again. I had a brother, Jason, 2 years older than me, who died unexpectedly 2 months prior in a motorcycle accident. He'd always been the adventurous one. Growing up, Jason and I spent entire summers exploring obscure trails, fishing in cold mountain streams, and doing everything we could to get away from the bustle of city life. In fact, some of my best memories are from family camping trips in southern Oregon, especially near Indigo Creek. That place was special to both of us. So, when he died, I decided I would fulfill what I believed to be his last wish, to have his ashes scattered someplace meaningful, someplace quiet and wild. Indigo Creek seemed perfect. I also brought my 5-year-old German Shepherd, Boomer. Boomer had been Jason's dog first, but I ended up taking care of him when my brother moved for a time and we grew attached. After the crash, Boomer was even more subdued, almost depressed. As much as a dog can be. I hoped this trip might give both of us closure. I was also carrying Jason's ashes in a small hand-carved wooden urn I had made myself. I'd etched Jason's initials on the lid with a tiny winged design that I thought he would have appreciated. The drive to Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest took about 3 hours. My phone was buzzing constantly with missed calls and texts from my mom, who was worried. She thought scattering Jason's ashes out there by myself was a little extreme. I felt bad ignoring her, but I truly believed I needed to do this alone. Well, alone except for Boomer. By the time I arrived at the small parking turnout near an unmaintained trail, the morning sun was just breaking through the low, damp cloud cover. A thick canopy of trees loomed beyond the muddy path. Even though everything looked gray and chilly, the old memory of exploring those woods with Jason warmed me. I loaded my backpack, a standard 50-liter hiking bag with a sleeping bag, small tent, cooking gear, freeze-dried food, water filtration kit, and a first aid set, clipped Boomer's leash to his collar, and headed in. I had marked out a route based on my recollection of the trail plus some guidance from old topographic maps. Indigo Creek flows roughly westward in this section, so the plan was to follow the creek bed until I hit a rocky bluff that overlooked a quiet pool of water. That was where Jason once saved me from nearly drowning when we were kids. I wanted to spread his ashes right there. I remember how calm the water could be, especially in late fall when the snowmelt had already run its course. For the first hour, I had no trouble at all. The temperature sat in the mid-40s, cool but not frigid. Boomer trotted by my side, occasionally whining as if he expected to see Jason pop out from behind a tree. It was around 10 a.m. when I first felt something unusual. Standing on the edge of the trail, I realized I had cell reception, so I decided to text Mom. But as I pulled out my phone, the battery icon blinked from 80% to 3% in a matter of seconds. The phone died. No big deal, I thought, just typical phone battery flakiness, but it nagged at me. This phone was brand new, and the battery should have been fine. Without the phone for a GPS backup, I relied on my paper maps and the memory of how Jason and I used to navigate. Boomer and I took a gentle downhill slope leading toward the creek. The forest was breathtaking. Giant evergreens and pines closed in overhead, blotting out much of the sky. The undergrowth was thick in places, a mixture of huckleberry bushes and ferns. Patches of fog hovered just off the ground. We arrived at a good campsite by midday, a flat clearing with evidence that some campers had used it over the summer. The remains of a rock fire ring sat at the center. I set up my tent while Boomer explored. He seemed on edge, sniffing everything, occasionally letting out a low growl at the tree line. I chalked it up to the smells of deer or maybe a bear in the area. Once the tent was good to go, I decided to do a quick reconnaissance of the creek to confirm that we were still on the right path. Indigo Creek was less than a quarter-mile away, close enough that I could hear the faint burble of water. But as we walked, the environment seemed to dim. The tree trunks were so thick they blocked out most of the midday sun, leaving an eerie twilight. In that half-light, my breath felt heavy, like the air was damp with more than just moisture. Boomer's ears were perked up, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. When we reached the creek, I recognized some of the large rocks and fallen logs from my last trip with Jason, except my memory placed them in different positions. We'd spent a weekend camping here about a year before he died, and I vividly recalled the log bridging the creek was angled differently. Then again, nature changes with time. Floods, storms, heavy snows can shift things. I reminded myself not to be paranoid. After exploring for about an hour, we returned to camp. That evening, I built a small fire using kindling from dead branches and pine cones. Boomer lay near me, ears still alert but not quite as tense as before. The crackle of the flames in the cool night air did wonders for my nerves. I cooked a dehydrated meal, fed Boomer some kibble, and decided to get some sleep. I took Jason's urn out of my pack and placed it carefully in the inner pocket. The wood was smooth under my fingers and I felt oddly soothed having it close. It must have been around midnight when I woke up to Boomer growling. My tent was zipped up and the small LED lantern inside glowed faintly. Boomer was right at the mesh door, the hackles on his back raised. I heard the sound of something moving just outside. I unzipped the tent a little and shined my flashlight around. The clearing looked empty, only tall shadows of trees and the remnants of the fire. The darkness between the pines felt almost tangible, though, as if shapes waited there. Nothing jumped out at me, so I told Boomer to relax. He settled down eventually, but continued to stare at the same spot along the tree line. Finally, I fell back asleep, uneasy but too tired to stay alert. The next morning, I stepped outside the tent and found small footprints encircling my camp. It took me a moment to realize they were mine. Same shoe size, same tread pattern. But I hadn't walked around the camp in that odd spiral shape. I kneeled to look closer, and my stomach dropped. On the ground, scrawled in the dirt, was a phrase, "Come home, Jason." It looked as though someone dragged a stick or maybe a branch to form the letters. But I recognized my own handwriting style, even though I had no memory of writing it. At first, I panicked. My thoughts jumped to the possibility of a trespasser or a local messing with me, but it was so specifically personal. I decided I must have been sleepwalking, that maybe stress or grief had triggered some unconscious action. I had to calm down and remind myself there must be a rational explanation. So I half succeeded in convincing myself it was a mix of my grief, exhaustion, and an overactive imagination. After packing up, I led Boomer further along the creek. It was about 3 miles to the place where I intended to scatter Jason's ashes. The weather was moist and gray, with a swirling fog that made the hike more claustrophobic than it should have been. Every time I checked my paper map, I felt like the lines and topography looked off. I could have sworn I was heading west, but my compass told me I was going southeast. Frustrated, I'd adjust, only to find an hour later that I had apparently doubled back. At around noon, I stumbled on a shallow creek crossing that seemed identical to one I'd crossed earlier. Could I have gone in a circle? But there were no footprints from my earlier crossing, and no sign that I'd been there. I had that disoriented feeling you get in a dream, where everything seems normal at first, but small details keep changing. Boomer let out a low whine. He refused to cross the water. No amount of coaxing or tugging would budge him. He pulled back so hard that I nearly lost my footing on a slippery rock and fell in. Finally, exasperated, I gave up on crossing there. I decided we'd camp again, hoping the morning might bring clearer weather or a better sense of direction. We set up camp early that day in a small clearing, nowhere near as nice as the first. It was too close to the water, with the rocky ground that made driving tent stakes a hassle. After an hour of struggling, I got the tent stable enough. The daylight started to fade prematurely, around 3 p.m. or so, as dark clouds rolled in. I quickly gathered wood for a fire, but everything was damp. Even with the help of some dry tinder from my backpack, the flames sputtered, threatened to die, and sometimes burned with a faint greenish hue, as though contaminated by copper or some chemical. I kept telling myself it was just damp pine or some algae on the wood. That night, exhaustion weighed on me heavily, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep peacefully. Boomer was restless, pacing at the edge of the tent, sometimes letting out an anguished whimper. Around midnight, the fire fully died. Thick smoke curled up and I coughed in the darkness. I could sense a presence out there, although I never saw anything. Maybe just that creeping paranoia again, right? Sometime in the early hours, I realized I was freezing. My sleeping bag felt damp, clammy. I sat up, rummaged for my flashlight, and nearly jumped out of my skin. The sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, which was normal enough, except it was lying open on the tent floor, as though someone had carefully slid me out. My clothes were all on. I had no recollection of leaving the bag. My entire body was stiff, the way you feel after you've been lying on cold ground. I turned the flashlight on Boomer's spot, only to find it empty, At first, a wave of panic hit me. Boomer must have gone out into the forest. I hurriedly unzipped the tent door to see if maybe he was just outside. He wasn't. In the darkness, the forest looked like a wall of black shapes. I grabbed my headlamp, some warmer clothes, and whistled for him. No response. I shouted his name for a good 20 minutes, stepping carefully around the campsite, shining my light in every direction. Nothing. Then I saw it. The small wooden urn, Jason's ashes, lying on the ground near my pack. The lid was off, lying a foot away, as if gently removed. My heart pounded. Could a wild animal do that? It didn't make sense. It was sealed too well. And anyway, why would an animal carefully place the lid to the side? Scrawled into the dirt beside the urn, again in my own style of writing, was a short phrase. "Come home, Jason." I'm ashamed to admit I momentarily forgot about Boomer in my horror at seeing that message again. My mind insisted that I must have done this in some fugue state, that maybe I was losing it under stress, but that didn't explain how the ashes were undisturbed or how I had no recollection at all. When my rational mind kicked back in, I realized I had to find Boomer. Despite the cold, I threw on my jacket, left my tent, and headed into the surrounding trees, calling out his name in a shaky voice. As I walked, my sense of time got weird. It felt like I'd been searching for maybe 10-15 minutes, but when I glanced at my watch, it still read 4:12 a.m. 15 minutes later, it still said 4:12 a.m. I tapped on the glass, fiddled with the dial, but it was stuck. The second hand wasn't moving either. An idea struck me that maybe it was some battery or mechanical failure, but I hadn't realized how heavily reliant I was on that watch to gauge time. Without it, the forest night took on an endless quality. For all I knew, hours could pass without me noticing. The cold air made my breath fog up, and that haze turned the beams of my flashlight into glowing cones that illuminated only a few yards ahead. That was when I heard Boomer barking. It came from somewhere beyond a dense cluster of pines. I rushed toward the sound, stumbling over rocks and roots, nearly twisting my ankle in the dark. Finally, I broke through to a small clearing. There lay Boomer's leash, just the leash. No dog, no footprints, nothing. I called his name and waited. Silence. In the distance, I heard a voice that sounded like my brother. "David," it whispered, as though it traveled on a breeze. My heart hammered so hard that I clutched my chest. It had to be in my head, but it came again. "David, follow me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was Jason's voice, no doubt about it. I looked around, saw nothing but dark silhouettes of trees. The voice came from deeper in the forest, where the canopy was thickest, a place so dark I could hardly see. It was insane, but I was desperate to find Boomer and to understand what was happening. So I followed. I walked for what felt like hours. My flashlight began flickering. The voice called intermittently, luring me deeper each time. Sometimes it would say my name. Other times, it would mutter phrases like, "I'm not me anymore." It was always Jason's voice, but sometimes layered with a static hiss. Then, abruptly, my flashlight died. Plunged into near total darkness, I groped around until I found a small area of ground that felt level, and I sat absolutely terrified. I tried to keep my breathing quiet so I could hear better. Everything was silent, unbearably so. No wind, no crickets, no rustle of branches, just the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then I heard Boomer barking again, closer now. I stood and tried to move toward the sound. I must have taken 5 steps before I kicked something. It felt like a backpack. I knelt down and realized it was the exact same brand and model as mine. Same tears on the shoulder strap, same color of mud caked on the bottom. For a moment, I thought I'd somehow circled back to my own campsite, but my actual pack was still in my tent. right? I opened this mysterious pack, shining the faint glow of my phone's emergency screen. Somehow the phone turned back on, displaying 3% battery to see inside. The contents were horrifying. My same freeze-dried meals, but wet and moldy. My same spare clothes, but shredded and dirtied, as though they'd been left out in the elements for weeks. I even found a damp, rotting photograph of Jason and me from a camping trip years ago. That had been in my wallet the entire time, not in my pack. I recoiled, chest tight with panic. There was no logical explanation for this. My phone flickered off again. That was when Boomer appeared. I picked up his faint outline in the dark, and then I felt him. A warm presence pressing against my leg. Relief washed over me. "Boomer," I gasped, groping his fur in the dark. It felt the same, and he made a low whining sound I recognized. I told him, "Good boy, we're going back to camp," with tears flooding my eyes. He let me slip his collar into my hand, and we made our way slowly back the way I thought I'd come. Surprisingly, it took only a few minutes to find the campsite again, even though it had taken me hours of searching to get out there. That weird sense of time slip returned, an internal confusion so profound it actually made me dizzy. I got inside the tent, Boomer right at my side. I lit my lantern, shining it on him. He wagged his tail once, but it looked unnatural, like a single mechanical flick, then stillness. I was so relieved to see him that I tried to ignore it. We both slept a little, though I kept the lantern on out of paranoia. When I woke up, no idea how long I'd slept. Boomer was lying there, staring at me. His tail was not wagging, and his eyes never left me. He blinked once, very slowly, before turning his head away. I tried to feed him, but he just stared at the food. He sniffed my hand, then gently bared his teeth. Not in a growl, but in something that looked like a grin. That set my nerves on edge. I decided that morning we needed to abandon the mission. I had the urn, the ashes. Scattering them at Indigo Creek sounded like a fantasy dream from a safer reality. My plan now was to get the hell out, hike back to my car, and come back some other day with a friend or family for moral support. However, the forest didn't seem to want me to leave. The trail I took was both familiar and alien. Giant trees looked like they had shifted position. The undergrowth thickened in places that had been passable just a day before. I had no working phone or watch. My compass spun if I held it near the creek, so I tried to follow the water's flow, but sometimes it felt like the current changed direction. At one point, I finally recognized a landmark, a large boulder near a bend in the creek. That boulder was only about half a mile from the parking turnout, which meant I was close to escaping, but the path from the boulder to the turnout didn't exist. Where there should have been a gently rising slope, I found only more tangled woods. I forced my way through brush until I realized I was on the edge of a steep ravine. The angle was too dangerous to descend without ropes. I tried a different angle, only to wind up at that same shallow creek crossing where Boomer had refused to go the day before. I lost track of how long I wandered. The day's light was once again fading, and the color of the sky was an ugly, grayish-brown. It gave me a sense of absolute isolation. Boomer followed but didn't interact with me. He didn't bark, whine, or pant. His mouth was closed, and he moved as though on autopilot. Then, in that disquieting silence, I caught a glimpse of something that made me scream. Dangling from a low tree branch was Boomer's collar, complete with the name tag I'd bought him last Christmas. The collar was torn and stained with something dark. I rushed over to it, heart in my throat. The dark stain looked suspiciously like dried blood. How was the dog behind me if his collar was here? I whirled around and pointed my flashlight at Boomer. In that instant, he, or it, wore a bizarre expression, like a person wearing a dog's face, The corners of his mouth twitched up, revealing human-like teeth. Then he vanished into the woods so swiftly he looked more shadow than flesh. I heard no footsteps, no leaves rustling. My mind reeled. I debated whether I should chase him or run in the opposite direction. Before I could decide, I noticed something behind the branch with the collar. I stepped closer, shining my light. There, pinned up in the crook of the tree, hung a body. It was Boomer, my real Boomer, lifeless, with his eyes open, mouth slack, fur matted with blood. I doubled over, retching, tears burning my eyes. He was drained of color, the body partially stiff. I stumbled backward, shaking. Had I just led an imposter dog around for half the day? I turned away, trying to hold on to what little sanity I had. If Boomer was dead, that meant the thing traveling with me was something else, something disguised as my dog. My thoughts shot to the voice that sounded like Jason. Perhaps the same presence was mimicking my brother. If that was even possible, I had no rational explanation. I headed away from that horrific scene, mostly on autopilot. My brain wanted to shut down. I wandered until I found what looked like an old, derelict cabin in a small clearing, half swallowed by the forest. The boards were rotted, the windows broken, but it was shelter. I pried the door open. Inside, the stench of mildew and decay assaulted me. A dusty table leaned against one wall, broken chairs lay scattered. There were also shelves filled with what I first thought were canisters or mason jars, only they were wooden, urn-shaped. Dozens of them. Some had names carved, and some were blank. My scalp prickled when I spotted one labeled David Keller. The carving was faint, almost incomplete, but undeniably my name. And next to it, Jason Keller. That urn was filled to the brim with an ashy substance. Horror soared through me. Had I somehow walked into a twisted crypt? Adrenaline surged, and I decided that if I stayed in this cabin, I'd lose my mind. Yet part of me wondered if it might offer safety from whatever prowled the woods. I propped a broken chair against the door as a makeshift barricade, then slumped to the floor, hugging Jason's real urn to my chest. My face was wet with tears. I tried to recall a single safe, happy memory, like the time Jason and I camped with our dad, telling ghost stories by the fire. But the memory twisted. Instead of hearing Jason's laugh, I heard that monstrous whisper, "I'm not me anymore." I must have drifted off. When I came to, I smelled smoke. The cabin was filled with a dim red glow, fire. The shelves were burning, flames licking up the walls. I coughed, eyes stinging. I sprang up, grabbing the backpack with the few supplies I had left. The old wooden urn labeled Jason Keller was still clutched tight in my hand. I had to get out before the entire place came down. But my makeshift barricade wouldn't budge at first. The handle was scalding hot. I pushed with all my strength and the door flew open. Scorching heat and sparks rained around me as I lunged outside. There, standing in front of the cabin, was my brother, Jason. He wore the same clothes he died in, dark jeans, a battered leather jacket that he'd had on during the motorcycle crash. His skin looked ashen, and his eyes were black, reflecting the flames. He grinned in a way that made me want to run, but my legs refused. His voice was soft and sibilant when he said, "Why did you leave me, David?" I stared, the hair on my arms standing up in pure terror. "You're not real," I stammered. He tilted his head, still smiling too wide. "But I'm here. I came home. Don't you want me with you?" A tear slipped down my cheek. A part of me wanted to believe it was truly Jason, but the smell, like rotten earth, made my stomach churn. He stepped closer, and I saw the bullet-sized hole in the center of his throat, the flesh parted like old leather. I realized this was no brother, nor was it an apparition. It was the hollow thing wearing my brother's face like a mask. Rage overcame fear for a moment. I lifted the heavy urn and hurled it at this mockery of Jason, striking him in the chest. The container broke, scattering ashes across the muddy ground. Jason made a hideous sound, part scream, part animal snarl. It was like he was choking. The skin around his chest bubbled, warping as if scalded by acid. He hissed, stumbling back. One of his arms flailed, the hand twisting into a claw-like shape. I realized that the actual ashes might have some effect on this entity. Perhaps carrying Jason's essence, truly his, had power. The hollow thing screeched again, the outline of its body flickering like a flame about to die. Stepping forward, I felt a surge of savage intent, an impulse to fight. I found a broken piece of metal, maybe a poker from an old fireplace, lying in the weeds. Grabbing it, I brandished it like a spear. The hollow thing recovered enough to take a halting step toward me, raising a twisted arm. It tried to speak, but the words poured out in multiple voices, including my own. "Come. Home. Jason?" it gurgled, as if pleading. Then the shape of my brother's face elongated unnaturally, like a reflection in a warped mirror. Desperation coursed through me. I rushed forward, shouting something incoherent, and drove the metal bar into the creature's throat. I expected solid resistance, but it felt like plunging into something spongy and wet. The monster wailed. A thick, black ooze seeped out around the bar, hissing like acid on contact with the air. I gagged at the stench, but I kept pushing, my hands shaking violently. The creature thrashed, clawing at me, slicing my arms. I cried out as a bright flash of pain shot through my left shoulder. At last, the hollow thing collapsed to its knees. The flickering image of Jason's face, the jacket, the entire form seemed to deflate like a balloon losing air. It let out a final wail that sounded heartbreakingly like my brother's real voice, scared and confused. And then it fell forward onto the muddy ground, spasming. I sank down a few feet away, panting, hardly able to see straight from the haze of smoke and shock. The only thing that broke the silence was the cabin behind us, still burning. The flames roaring as they consumed that wicked place and all its urns. I wasn't sure how much time passed. I remember half crawling to a clearing, feeling blood run down my arm, the left side of my shirt soaked. I had to lean against a tree, focusing all my willpower to not pass out. My mind felt unmoored. Everything about these past days felt like a nightmare loop, especially with no functioning watch or phone to track reality. I kept thinking the sun would rise soon, but the sky never got brighter. The forest remained stuck in twilight. Somehow, I did eventually see a dull, cold sunrise. The light filtered through the charred trunks, revealing swirling smoke overhead. The cabin burned itself down to the foundation, and the hollow thing's body? It was gone when I looked back, just a dark stain in the dirt. I had to limp away, ignoring the horrifying possibilities of where it went. My only goal was to get out. It must have been hours more that I wandered. My shoulder wound was throbbing, and I'd lost a lot of blood. My pack was mostly destroyed, but I'd managed to keep a small med kit. I wrapped a bandage around my arm, took a few sips of water from a half-crushed bottle. Darkness started closing in again, but I forced myself to keep walking, leaning on every trunk for support. At some point, I heard a distant droning overhead. Helicopter blades. The sound filled me with a desperate relief. I stumbled toward an opening in the trees. And there they were, a search and rescue team. I don't know how they found me. Maybe someone reported my car abandoned for too long. Maybe the forest allowed them through. 2 medics rushed toward me, guiding me into a rescue chopper. I think I blacked out the moment they strapped me to a stretcher. When I came to again, I was in a hospital bed. The fluorescent lighting felt harsh and artificial. An IV in my arm fed me fluids. My mother was sitting nearby, teary-eyed but relieved. She hugged me gently, mindful of my injuries. Doctors said I had hypothermia, severe blood loss from lacerations, and signs of malnourishment. They asked me how long I'd been out there. I told them it couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 days, but they exchanged worried looks. My mother insisted it had been over a week since I'd left. They'd been searching for me all that time. The sheriff came by eventually to ask what happened. I told him I got lost, injured, that my dog ran off. I left out the horrors I'd witnessed, the monstrous shape that wore my brother's face, the false Boomer that followed me. I said only that Boomer died somehow. That part was true. The sheriff didn't press for more detail, seeming to sense I wasn't in a state to talk. Weeks passed. I got better physically, though nightmares plagued me. Mom tried to comfort me, but I couldn't confide in her about the full scope of what I experienced. The hospital staff recommended therapy, and I agreed. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that horrifying grin on the dog that was not Boomer, or the flickering grin on the face that was not Jason. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked a nurse if they recovered Boomer's remains. They looked into it. No one had found a dog's body. They searched my personal effects. My phone was waterlogged and broken, so no data was recoverable. My watch was stuck at 4:12, the face cracked. The only item they recovered from me that seemed intact was a single wooden urn, half burned. But it was empty. I had no memory of carrying that out. The day I was discharged, I had to walk by a mirror in the hospital hallway. I paused, glancing at my reflection. At first, I thought the glass was dirty or warped. Then I realized my reflection was blinking out of sync with me, just a fraction of a second delay. I rubbed my eyes, but it stayed that way, the reflection always a beat behind. A cold shiver traveled the length of my spine. A doctor asked if I was okay, and I forced a smile, nodding. It felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. Even now, writing this, I don't feel quite myself. My mother insisted we come back home to Eugene and hold a quiet memorial for Jason. But every once in a while, I wake up in the middle of the night, certain that I hear him calling me, or Boomer barking. Sometimes I wonder if part of me died in those woods, or if something else came out wearing my face. Whenever someone asks about Boomer, I find myself hesitating, as if I might slip up and reveal something impossible. More than once, I've caught myself saying, "He made it out. He's around here somewhere," even though I know he's gone. I'll never go back to Indigo Creek again. I couldn't bear to see what might lurk there. All I know is that something followed me out of those woods. Or maybe it never let me leave, and I'm still there, wandering. I guess it doesn't matter. I can't tell where one reality ends and another begins. But if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that I'm not the David Keller who went into that forest. I'm not me anymore. My name is Mark Riley. I'm 38 years old, and this happened in August of last year. It's taken me months to even speak about it, let alone write it all down. I've heard people talk about trauma like it's a weight clinging to you, dragging you back into the darkness whenever you think you're free. I can't claim to be free. I still dream about it, still see it in the corner of my eye when headlights sweep across the window at night. This is my attempt to record everything that happened in the Wallowa Mountains, out near Eagle Cap Wilderness in northeastern Oregon, where I went to camp with my dog, Kona, and stumbled on a nightmare that still refuses to let me go. I'm originally from Portland. I worked, as a graphic designer for a small startup that specialized in marketing campaigns for local businesses. The job was stressful, and my divorce only made it worse. By the end of July last year, I was raw and desperate for an escape. My therapist recommended I try something that took me out of my comfort zone, so I decided to do a multi-day backcountry trip. I'd been camping before, but always at car-accessible sites with bathrooms and signposts. This time, I wanted to get far away from people, from the daily reminders of how my life was coming apart, and so I chose the rugged, pristine mountains of the Eagle Cap Wilderness, a place known for sheer beauty and unforgiving trails. Some local hikers call it Oregon's Alps. With hindsight, I can say it's more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. I drove out on a Thursday morning. It took about 5 hours to get from Portland to the outskirts of the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. My plan was to leave my car at a trailhead, load up my pack, and hike a couple of miles in to find a decent campsite near a ridgeline I'd researched online. The forest roads were dusty and sometimes rutted, but I arrived without too many issues. Kona, my 5-year-old German Shepherd mix, had been snoozing in the back seat, occasionally popping her head up to press her nose against the window whenever we passed a meadow or stream. She'd always been my shadow. We'd rescued her when she was a puppy, back when my wife and I were still married. Keeping Kona was really the only victory I felt I'd gotten out of the divorce. She was my family now. At the trailhead, I parked, checked the map, and stuffed my gear into a single large pack. I had a small side bag for snacks and anything I might need to grab quickly while walking. Kona had her own harness and small saddlebags with some of her kibble and a collapsible water dish. I remember feeling a sense of exhilaration setting out into that thick, evergreen forest. The sense of pine, the crisp clarity in the air, the call of birds overhead. My phone showed enough signal to send a quick text to my therapist. I made it. Gonna be off-grid for a while. Wish me luck. I wasn't lying about being off-grid. The coverage out there was poor, and I deliberately left behind my usual electronics aside from the phone and a single power bank. In truth, I wanted to cut off contact. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. The first afternoon went smoothly, better than I expected. The ground was a bit muddy from a storm a few days prior, but the temperature stayed mild. I followed a well-worn path that wound gradually upward. At a fork, I veered east, going toward a remote ridge that, according to my map, overlooked a spectacular valley. I had read a few blog posts claiming the vantage point at sunrise was worth the effort. Kona trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure I was following. The only hassle was the weight of my pack, but I'd practiced a bit around the neighborhood, so I adjusted easily enough. I found a decent flat area to camp just before sundown. It was near some pines and offered a partial view of a steep drop into the valley below. Setting up my tent was routine. I hammered in the stakes, spread out my sleeping pad and bag, and gathered some firewood with Kona's help. She wandered the perimeter, ears perked, tail wagging, sniffing every log and stump. The night came slowly, painting the sky red, then purple, then black. I cooked a freeze-dried meal on my small camp stove while Kona crunched on her kibble. After dinner, I built a modest fire and sat there staring into the flames, occasionally talking to Kona as if she could reply. I told her about the divorce, about my regrets. It felt silly, but also comforting. She would tilt her head as though she understood everything. Sometime around 10, the stars were out in full force. I admired them for a while and then decided to turn in. I crawled into my tent, Kona following, curling up at my feet. I remember feeling hopeful, like maybe this trip was going to do exactly what I'd wanted. The forest beyond the tent walls was quiet and still. I fell asleep listening to Kona's gentle breathing. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of snapping twigs. At first, I thought it must be a deer or maybe a raccoon sniffing around for scraps, but it sounded more like footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. Kona lifted her head, ears twitching, eyes alert. She didn't bark, though. That was odd. Usually she'd give at least a low growl if she sensed something, but she just stared at the tent wall, transfixed. My heart hammered. The footsteps paused for a moment, then continued in the opposite direction, crunching leaves. Fear kept me frozen. Every survival instinct told me to stay still. After a long minute, the sound faded back into the forest. Kona lowered her head again, as if deciding it was nothing. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just a curious animal, maybe a black bear that smelled our food. Regardless, it took me hours to drift off again. The next morning, I half expected to find my cooler overturned or footprints in the dirt, but the site looked untouched, save for a single piece of bark lying in front of my tent with a small swirl carved into it. It must have broken off a tree in the wind, I told myself. Still, that swirl pattern was too perfect. I decided to ignore it, stuffing the bark under a rock. I had coffee using my little camp stove, fed Kona, and then decided we'd do a day hike farther up the ridge. The map said there was a lake about 3 miles away that might be worth seeing. That's when I noticed my phone was already at 25% battery. That was strange, given I'd hardly used it and had powered it off at night. It refused to charge on the power bank. The power bank's LED flickered, then died, as though it had no juice left. Great, I thought. So much for having a backup. Still, I shrugged it off. I'd come here to disconnect anyway. We set out around 8. The trail quickly vanished into thicker forest, the ground layered with pine needles. The further we went, the more I felt an odd hush settle around us. Occasionally, birds called, but it felt subdued somehow, as if the forest was listening. After about an hour, the path became muddled with game trails. I paused, pulling out the map. That's when I realized the route I was looking at wasn't matching what was on paper. The slope angles were off. A stream that was clearly to my left on the map ended up to my right. I started to worry that I was reading the map incorrectly. Perhaps the earlier storm had shifted some of the terrain or rerouted the water. Or maybe it was just my inexperience. Determined to keep going, I picked what I believed was the correct direction. By midday, I decided we must have overshot the lake entirely. Kona seemed unbothered, panting and happily sniffing brush, but my feet were sore, and the sun was beating down. The temperature had soared. We took a break in the shade of a tall pine, and I gave Kona water from a collapsible bowl. As I rested, I happened to glance at my watch. It read 1:04 p.m., but the position of the sun suggested it was more like 10 or 11 in the morning. I tapped the face. The second hand ticked forward a bit too quickly, then froze. Suddenly, it jumped, skipping minutes, then settled at 12:53. That gave me a little jolt of unease. It was a battery watch, not a wind-up, so it shouldn't do that. Yet I figured maybe the battery was dying. I'd had it for years. Feeling the first prickle of worry, I decided we'd try to circle back. All illusions of seeing a pristine lake had vanished. Now, I just wanted the safety of my campsite. The hike back took longer than expected, probably 4 hours of going up and down shallow ravines, crossing rocky outcrops that I was sure I hadn't come across before. By the time I recognized a fallen log from earlier that morning, the sun was veering west, deep orange rays slicing through the tree trunks. My watch now said 4:22, but the way the shadows stretched made it feel more like 6 or 7. Everything was off. We got back to camp at near sunset, judging by the light. I checked my phone. It was dead, refusing even to show the battery icon. Perfect. No map references, no emergency calls, and obviously no real sense of time except for the lengthening shadows. With a frustrated sigh, I got my little hatchet and some rope, intending to gather enough firewood for a hearty blaze. I had that uneasy memory of the footsteps from last night. A bright fire would bring me comfort. I told Kona, "Stay close, girl," and she seemed to sense my anxiety, walking at my side rather than wandering off. There was a thick patch of old pines not too far from camp, their lower branches dried out and perfect for kindling. I started chopping. Kona perked her ears and stared into the darkening forest beyond. I patted her flank, reassuring myself more than her. When I looked down, I realized the branches I'd chopped were full of holes, like they'd been gnawed or eaten by insects from within. They smelled rancid, almost like decaying meat. It was bizarre enough that I dropped them, deciding to find better fuel. Then I heard a rustling behind me. I turned, hatchet in hand, but only saw Kona standing at attention, her hackles raised. She let out the lowest growl I'd ever heard from her. Every bit of fur along her spine was up, tail rigid. I followed her line of sight, but there was only a thick cluster of ferns and a fallen log. I whispered, "Who's there?" because in that moment, I couldn't help but imagine a person crouching just out of sight. No answer. Yet, I could swear I heard breathing. Slow, raspy exhalations. I held the hatchet high, stepping forward. But once I reached the log, I saw nothing. The odor, though, lingered. That same rotten smell. Unnerved, I decided I had enough wood. Back at camp, I tried to start my fire with a lighter and some dryer lint I'd brought. The lint flared up, and the kindling started to crackle. Seconds later, the flames simply vanished, as if snuffed by an unseen hand. I tried again, piling small twigs, paper scraps, everything. It burned for an instant, then died. I rubbed my eyes in frustration. "Not funny, nature," I muttered. Eventually, with enough attempts, the fire stayed lit, though it burned with an odd bluish tinge at the edges of the flame, giving off a chemical smell. I felt nauseous, but I wasn't about to give up the only sense of security I had. Kona lay next to me, still tense, watching the tree line. Night fell, and with it came a thick, almost palpable darkness. No moon illuminated the sky, and the stars seemed fewer than the previous night. I had a single LED lantern that cast a meager circle of light around the campsite. The fire flickered and hissed. After a meager dinner of freeze-dried soup, I settled next to Kona. She was uneasy, occasionally letting out a short whine. I stared at the forest, seeing shapes in the flickering darkness. Once, I thought I caught a glimpse of two glowing eyes, but I blinked and they were gone. It might have been a reflection off the brush, or not. At some point, exhaustion won. I crawled into the tent, letting the fire burn low. Kona followed. I drifted off into shallow sleep, my mind swirling with half-formed nightmares of black shapes creeping into the tent, rummaging through my gear, or pressing their faces right against mine. I awoke to Kona's frantic barking. I bolted upright. Her head was at the tent door, hackles fully raised, barking in a way I'd never heard, fierce and terrified. Before I could unzip the door, she lunged out, and I heard her tearing across camp. Heart racing, I scrambled out after her barefoot. The night was unbelievably cold, and the fire was out, leaving only glowing embers. I heard Kona's snarling from somewhere in the woods. "Kona!" I yelled, searching for a flashlight. My lantern was turned off. I flicked the switch, but it wouldn't light. "Kona!" I called again. She barked once more, a pained yelp echoing back. Terror shot through me. I grabbed the small headlamp from inside my pack, hit the switch, and was relieved to see the faint beam. I sprinted into the forest, calling her name. The undergrowth was thick, branches whipping my arms and legs. My mind was a chaos of fear. Had she cornered a bear? Or was it a cougar? Or something else? I found a small clearing where the ferns were flattened, as though something large had passed through. But there was no sign of her. I shouted myself hoarse. Eventually, I heard a soft whining deeper in the woods. "Kona!" I ran, nearly tripping over roots, the headlamp flickering as though the batteries were dying. The whine led me to a rocky outcrop near a small stream. I spotted Kona lying on her side, panting. I rushed forward, shining the light on her. There was blood on her right flank, 3 deep gashes. She whimpered and tried to lick my hand, her eyes wide with panic. I knelt, tears in my throat, carefully touching the wounds. They were nasty, but not necessarily mortal. I had a small first aid kit back at camp. I needed to get her there. I tried lifting her, but she was nearly 70 pounds of muscle. Adrenaline helped me get her to her feet, and I half walked, half carried her back to camp, promising her it would be okay. Back at the campsite, I cleaned her wounds with antiseptic from my kit, my hands shaking. She trembled with pain, but licked my face as if reassuring me. I carefully bandaged the cuts. It looked like an animal's claws, wide-set slashes. Maybe a wolf or a cougar. But something about the spacing was wrong. Too wide. The marks seemed unnaturally spread, like a hand with slender, elongated fingers. That thought made me tremble so badly I had to pause and gather myself. Once I had her bandaged, I gently laid her in the tent, stroking her fur until she fell into an uneasy sleep. I spent the rest of the night awake, the hatchet clutched in my hand, eyes darting toward every rustle outside. By dawn, I decided the trip was over. Kona needed a vet, and I was too shaken to keep going. But the question was, how to get back safely? The main trailhead was a good distance away. I'd planned to stay 4 days, so I was pretty far in. Everything felt dangerous now. I began packing up at first light, but that's when I realized something else had gone very wrong. My backpack was missing. My tent was there, my sleeping gear was there, but the large green backpack that held most of my supplies, food, cooking utensils, emergency flare, rope, gone. At first I thought maybe I'd left it near the fire. No, or maybe near the trunk of my car. Impossible. I was certain I'd brought it into the tent. Then I saw a faint trail of drag marks leading away from my campsite, as if it had been pulled. Shaking with anger and fear, I followed the trail about 50 yards down a slope, and there it was, shredded, contents strewn about. My water filter had been stomped into the dirt or crushed. My freeze-dried meals were scattered, pouches torn open. Worse, the food inside had turned black and mushy, as if rotted for weeks. I gagged at the stench. The entire backpack reeked of decay, mold, and something else that reminded me of that rancid wood from earlier. This was no normal scavenging. It was almost deliberate. My gear was destroyed in a way that felt like sabotage. I rescued what I could. A spare t-shirt, a partially intact bag of jerky, and a water bottle that seemed untouched. Everything else was ruined. I returned to the tent to find Kona awake, whining softly, shifting her weight to avoid putting pressure on the wounds. Her bandages were still in place, but she bled a little through the gauze. I fed her some fresh water. She drank greedily, her trust in me unwavering despite the terror we'd gone through. I held her face for a moment. "We're leaving," I whispered. "We're getting out." I had to improvise. My phone was dead, so I had no way of calling for help or checking a GPS. My physical map, which was in the outside pocket of my backpack, was water-damaged and torn, near unreadable. I had no clue which way might be the shortest route out, but I remembered the general direction of the trailhead. West. If I followed the sun's arc, I could probably guess which way was west. I rigged a rough sling from the tent's rainfly and used some rope to create a harness I could slip under Kona's hips. That way, I could help support her weight if she had trouble walking. She struggled to her feet, limping. The pain in my chest, seeing her like that, was overwhelming. Still, I had no choice but to move forward. We started hiking. my arms strained, holding the improvised harness, trying to keep Kona as comfortable as possible. The forest thickened, the terrain grew steeper, and soon everything was unnervingly unfamiliar. Every so often, I'd swear the sun jumped in the sky, like I'd lost minutes or hours in an instant. My watch was worthless now, frozen, its hand stuck at 12:53. Once, I glanced up to see the sun at maybe halfway to noon, and the next time I looked, it hovered near the horizon, the light turning orange. It made no sense. I thought maybe I was hallucinating from stress, but it was real enough that I couldn't ignore it. At some point, I stumbled on a slope of loose rock, nearly losing my grip on Kona. I caught myself against a boulder, scraping my palms. That was when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Footprints, my footprints, from my boots, pacing in a circle at the edge of the slope. They were fresh. I recognized the tread pattern. How could that be? I had never been here before, yet there they were, looping around in a bizarre swirl. It was as though I'd been walking there in circles for hours, yet I had no memory of it. Worse still, there was a dog's paw prints alongside them, also in a circle, but the spacing suggested something on 2 legs, not 4. It was horrifying to realize the paw prints were aligned like a bipedal stride. I stared at them for a long time, confusion battling terror in my mind. Finally, I forced myself to move on. We walked for what felt like days, though it could have been hours or less. My sense of time unraveled. I'd look up, see a faint midday sun blink, and the sky would be streaked with the pinks and purples of dusk. My stomach growled, but I had only that bag of jerky and a couple granola bars left. Kona drank from a stream once, but otherwise we saw no signs of wildlife, no squirrels, birds, or deer. It was as though the forest had emptied, leaving just the trees and an eerie hush. Late into the afternoon, if that word had any meaning now, Kona suddenly jerked forward, yanking the makeshift harness from my grasp, then darted into the thick underbrush. I yelled after her, voice raw. She didn't bark, she just ran, ignoring her injury. I tore after her, ignoring my own exhaustion and fear. I found her about 100 yards away, standing in a clearing, tail stiff, facing a figure who stood half-shrouded by a large pine. My heart leapt into my throat when I saw the figure wearing my clothes. It had the same green jacket I'd been wearing that morning, the same muddy boots. It was me, down to the shape of my face, except its eyes were too wide, the irises too pale. Its mouth curled into a smile that was both foreign and intimately familiar. Kona let out a low growl, stepping sideways as though not sure whether to lunge or back away. My own voice emerged from the stranger's throat. "Mark." I found her. It held out a hand, as if beckoning me to approach. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I hallucinating? Had I lost it entirely? Then the figure took a step forward, and I saw the movement was slightly off, jerky. Its limbs twitched in a way that reminded me of a predator inching closer to prey. It repeated, "Mark, come help me with her." Only this time the intonation was garbled, like it was still learning how to speak. I picked up a fallen branch, brandishing it like a weapon. "Get away from her," I shouted, voice cracking. My dog bared her teeth, the hackles rising once more. The thing that wore my face cocked its head, and for a moment it looked almost hurt. Then it lunged at Kona. She leapt back, but it was too fast. In a surreal flash, it pinned her, grabbing her wounded flank with a gloved hand. Except there was no glove. Its fingers ended in black tips that sank into her bandages. Kona howled. Rage and horror exploded inside me. I swung the branch as hard as I could at the creature's head. It connected with a sickening thud, splintering. The thing staggered, then turned to me, face twisting with fury. It rushed me. I barely dodged, stumbling as it raked at my shoulder. I felt a sharp sting as those black nails tore through my jacket, drawing blood. Kona limped away, panting, trying to position herself to help me, but she was too hurt. I scrambled back, eyes darting for a weapon. The creature advanced, repeating in a mocking tone, "Help me! Help me with her!" Over and over, like a broken record. I saw the hatchet handle protruding from my half-torn pack that I'd slung over my shoulder. With trembling fingers, I grabbed it, yanked it free. The creature reached for me, and I swung. It jerked back, but I managed to strike its arm. I felt resistance, like hitting thick hide, then the blade sank in with a spurt of dark fluid that looked too thick to be normal blood. The creature screamed, my own voice echoing across the clearing. It staggered away, clutching its wound. I seized the moment, threw myself to Kona's side and pulled her up, hooking an arm under her chest. I had no illusions about fighting this thing head-on. We had to run. We stumbled through dense brush, branches slashing my face and arms. I heard it behind us, hissing and snarling, sometimes letting out dog-like yelps that sounded so much like Kona that it made me shiver. Once or twice, I lost my footing, convinced it would catch us, but somehow we kept going. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and Kona was whimpering in pain. At last, the sounds of pursuit fell away, replaced by the steady rush of a river. We'd reached some sort of waterway. In a stroke of luck, we found a small slope leading down to the bank. The river wasn't massive, perhaps part of the Lostine River or one of its tributaries. I recognized some of the rocky shapes from photos I'd seen online of the area. If I could follow it downstream, maybe it would eventually lead to a trail or a forest road. But darkness was quickly falling. The sky changed from a dull overcast to inky black in mere minutes, as though someone had flipped a cosmic switch. With no tent, no real supplies, and a dangerously injured dog, I was at a complete loss for what to do. I carried Kona to a dry patch under a towering spruce. She whimpered, licking my cheek as though apologizing for being hurt. My shoulder bled from the creature's slash. I'd stuffed a rag over it, but it was still seeping. The sting of it, combined with the cold night air, made my whole body tremble. I tried to build a small fire using a lighter and some leftover tinder in my pockets. It sparked, but immediately died, as if the air itself smothered it. It felt like everything about this place was rejecting the notion of warmth. The memory of that bluish flame from the previous night lingered in my mind. We huddled together, shivering in the dark. For a time, I heard distant scraping noises like claws on bark. Now and then a faint laugh that sounded like me. I tried to keep Kona calm, stroking her fur and whispering nonsense. My mind was unraveling. I wanted to believe dawn would bring relief, that we'd see the sun and somehow find a path out of this. But given the broken sense of time here, the sun might never come. I must have dozed off at some point from sheer exhaustion because I woke in a daze to a horrifying sight. My dog was walking, except it wasn't Kona. The shape was the same, but in the gloom I noticed her muzzle looked too long, and her eyes shone white, without pupils. She turned to me, grinning in a way dogs simply can't, lips pulled back unnaturally. I scrambled backward, mouth opening in a silent scream. Then Kona whined behind me. Confusion washed over me. I spun around. She was still lying there, battered, eyes half closed. I turned back, shining the faint light from my failing headlamp, and the other figure was gone. Nothing but darkness. My entire body shook. My mind felt fractured. The weird illusions of time, the rotting supplies, this creature that copied faces and forms. I clutched Kona, half expecting her to vanish from under my arms. But she stayed warm and trembling. We both sat there, wide awake, until the first traces of dawn. The color of the sky went from charcoal to deep purple, but it felt more like an imitation of a sunrise than the real thing. As soon as it was light enough to see, I forced myself to my feet. My shoulders ached from sleeping upright, and my bleeding had mostly clotted, leaving a crusty patch under my jacket. Following the river downstream was the only option. We limped along its bank, sometimes climbing over fallen trees or scrambling up short ridges. Kona's pace slowed with each step, her bandages dirty and damp. I worried about infection. The day seemed endless, the sun crawling overhead too fast, then too slow. At some point, I heard a helicopter in the distance, a dull thumping echo off the mountains. I tried to wave, but the canopy was too dense, and then I realized the sound wasn't overhead, it was behind me. I glanced back. The forest was empty. We continued until my legs felt like lead. The river led us to a small clearing with an old, run-down wooden shack. My hope soared. Maybe it was a ranger outpost or some leftover trapper's cabin. I stumbled toward it, ignoring every warning sign in my head that told me something was very wrong. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. I stepped inside, carefully guiding Kona. The single room was dusty, filled with a damp smell that reminded me of rotting leaves. A rickety table stood against one wall, and on it lay a broken mirror. The reflective surface was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but I could still see fragments of my reflection. I was filthy, eyes wild, a cut across my brow caked with dried blood. I set Kona down in a relatively clean corner. She whined, licking my hand as if to say she was done walking. I couldn't blame her. I rummaged for anything useful. There were old cans scattered around, some unidentifiable. A rusted wood stove in the corner looked beyond salvage. No first aid kit, no tools, except a small rusted handsaw that would snap if I tried to use it. Then I saw a single red flare gun near the stove. My heart pounded with a spark of hope. Finally, a potential way to signal for help. I crawled over, ignoring the way the floor groaned under my weight. The flare gun felt heavy, real. Next to it lay one battered flare cartridge. One shot. But maybe that was all I needed. Movement flickered in the corner of my eye. I turned sharply. The mirror on the table caught my reflection, but something about it was wrong. In the fractured glass, I saw myself standing there. But I wasn't crouched. I was upright, eyes locked on me, unmoving. Slowly, the reflection's lips curled into a grin. My heart pounded. I squeezed my eyes shut, shook my head, and when I looked again, it was just me, hunched and trembling. The cracks in the mirror gave my face an ugly, segmented look. My reflection's eyes no longer grinned. I heard the faint echo of my own voice from outside the shack. Help me with her?" The exact words from the clearing. My blood ran cold. A thunderous crash shook the door. Kona barked weakly. I jumped to my feet, aiming the flare gun at the door. It burst inward, wood splintering. Standing there was me again, the other Mark, except now the illusion was more grotesque. Its face flickered, the eyes shifting from pale to black. The arms were slightly too long, the fingers tipped with those same black nails. It stepped forward into the shack, head tilting, that same disturbing smile warping its lips. "I found her," it said, voice stuttering. Then it let out a sound like a dog's bark, a hideous mimic. I fired the flare gun without thinking. The burning projectile struck the creature square in the chest, sparking and igniting its jacket. It let out a shrieking wail that sounded like me, like Kona, like a chorus of voices in agony. Fire lit the shack with a blinding red glow, flickering eerily off the broken mirror. The creature stumbled, banged against the table, collapsed to the ground, thrashing and screaming. Smoke filled the shack. I coughed, my eyes watering. The wooden floor began to catch. Realizing the whole place would go up in flames, I lunged for Kona, pulling her across the threshold. The creature flailed, half on fire, still howling in that terrible imitation of me. My chest clenched in pity, revulsion, and a primal need to survive. With one last look, I gripped the hatchet at my belt, swung it at a supporting beam above the creature, and forced part of the ceiling to collapse. Flaming debris rained down on it, burying it in embers. I stumbled backward, coughing, tears streaming as the shack erupted into an inferno. Kona whimpered at my side. The creature's screams became muffled, as though the flames devoured its voice. My head spun with the smoke, the heat pressing in. That was when the front wall of the shack gave way with a crash. I dragged Kona away, out into the clearing, the night sky overhead. I collapsed on the grass, chest heaving, the intense glow of the fire dancing over the trees. For a few seconds, I was sure we'd finally killed that monstrosity. Then, behind the roar of the flames, I thought I heard footsteps again. Slow, scraping. My heart thundered. The shape of a figure emerged at the edge of the flames, half burned, its limbs contorted. It let out a tortured, wet sound, crawling on all fours. The skin it wore flickered, flickering between my features and something monstrous. It was still alive. I let out a guttural cry, looking around for any way to finish this nightmare. My hatchet glinted in the firelight, lying a few feet away. I scrambled for it. The creature hissed, trying to rise. I didn't think, I just acted. With a surge of adrenaline, I leapt forward and brought the hatchet down on its back. I felt the blade bite into something solid. A jolt traveled up my arms, and the creature screamed in a guttural pitch, spasming. Dark, tar-like fluid poured from the wound. It thrashed, knocking me aside with shocking strength. I landed hard, seeing stars. Kona barked, her last scrap of bravery. Somehow, I managed to get up again, dragging myself forward to where the creature lay twitching. One of its arms was pinned under a burning beam. Its eyes were wide, pupils spinning. I roared and swung again, burying the hatchet into its spine. This time, something cracked and the screams died in a gurgle. For a long moment, the only sounds were the crackle of the burning shack and my own ragged breathing. My body trembled, every muscle poised for the creature to rise once more. It didn't. Finally, I crawled backward to Kona, who was whining quietly. I wrapped my arms around her, sobbing, my throat raw, the heat of the fire scorching my skin. Smoke billowed into the sky, carrying embers that drifted like fireflies around us. I half expected another figure to walk out of the flames, but nothing came. We stayed there until the shack collapsed in on itself, the blaze gradually dying down to charred embers. My heart rate never slowed. I was certain the skinwalker would rise from the ashes or appear behind me in another form. But dawn came in a subtle shift of color overhead. With that same disjointed sense of time, the sky brightened, and the shapes of the mountains became visible in silhouette. I forced myself to move, to limp away with Kona, toward what I hoped was civilization. Hours blurred. I remember stumbling across a faint trail, then seeing a battered old trail sign pointing west. I had to rest often, carrying Kona when she couldn't walk. My ankle throbbed, my shoulder wound burned, but none of that mattered as long as I kept going. At some point, I heard voices. Real human voices. Two men in bright orange jackets emerged around a bend in the trail, looking as startled to see me as I was to see them. They were volunteer search and rescue from Joseph, Oregon, out looking for a missing hiker, not me, ironically. I collapsed in relief, tears streaming. They radioed for help, gave Kona some water, and helped me limp to a nearby station where a helicopter eventually arrived. The medics asked me a barrage of questions I couldn't fully answer. What attacked me? A cougar, a bear, My delirious claims of a thing wearing my face earned me concerned looks. They treated my cuts, bandaged Kona, and took us to a hospital in Enterprise. Over the following days, I gave repeated statements to local authorities. They chalked it up to a probable animal attack, dehydration, shock, and severe stress. No one quite knew what to make of the pieces of story I could share. The search team that went to check found no cabin, no burnt structure. Just a stretch of scorched trees, though not enough to have been a full building fire. They didn't find footprints or corpses or any sign of what I fought. They did find my torn backpack in the woods, a rotted mess. I was discharged from the hospital with a shoulder stitched up, bandages on my hands, and a month's worth of antibiotics. Kona's injuries healed slowly, leaving her with a scar that traced across her right flank. She was never quite the same dog after that, always on edge, always staring into corners. I moved out of Portland after that, quitting my job. I didn't care about anything but putting distance between me and those mountains. For a time, I lived near the coast, sleeping with the lights on, checking the mirror constantly to see if my reflection would grin back at me. So far, it hasn't. And yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the echoes of my own voice calling for help. Or I see a flicker of movement across the hallway mirror, just outside my line of sight. When Kona jolts awake, barking at nothing, my blood runs cold. The worst part is that I can't say with certainty I survived. Something came back from those woods. Me, battered, traumatized. But I'll never forget that moment in the mirror when my reflection smiled without me moving a muscle, or the footprints that matched my boots perfectly, but walked in circles where I'd never been. I sometimes wonder if the real Mark died out there, or if the creature only needed to wear my face to walk among people again. I try not to linger on those thoughts. I have to live to push forward. But at night, when the house is quiet, I see the wallow of pines in my dreams, smell that rancid decay, hear the static pop of bluish flames, and feel that tar-like blood on my hands. And always, beneath the wind, I hear the sound of something wearing my voice, laughing. Maybe I escaped that ridge body, but part of me is still there, or something else came back in my place. I can't decide which possibility scares me more. 01. My name is Daniel McCoy. I'm 33 years old. This happened in late October of last year, deep in Oregon's Bull of the Woods wilderness. I had planned the trip to heal from my recent divorce and to challenge myself. Camping alone might have been enough, but I was never good at feeling totally isolated. So I invited a small group of acquaintances. Miles Creighton, who worked with me, Jessie Parker, an old friend of the family, and her friend Taylor Rhodes. Also, I brought my dog Jasper, a black lab mix who's always been a bit too anxious for his own good. None of us were veterans, none of us were survival experts. We were just regular people with a few pieces of camping equipment and the misplaced confidence that we could handle 4 days off the grid. I want to emphasize that back then, I was searching for some kind of internal peace. I was recently divorced from a woman I still cared about, and I wanted to prove I could thrive on my own, even if it meant dragging a few others along for the ride. The plan was a simple loop trail near Elk Lake Creek. We all thought the region would be beautiful in the fall. Red and gold leaves drifting across winding paths, crisp air, and maybe the quiet we all claimed to desire. Instead, we found something else. I remember we left early in the morning. The drive itself was uneventful. We parked miles from a more popular trailhead because we wanted fewer people around. In hindsight, that was the first mistake. We took a spur trail that was supposedly rarely traveled and secluded. Precisely what we were after, right? It was just wide enough for us to walk single file, each with our packs. Jasper trotted at my side, sniffing the dirt, flicking his ears at the faintest sounds. Miles kept joking that we were heading into Bigfoot country. He was 34, tall and lean, and had a penchant for thrill-seeking. He'd mention everything from ghosts to cryptids, sometimes half-seriously, sometimes obviously teasing. He'd also brought some mushrooms and weed, which he'd brandish and say, "If anyone wants to see the forest spirits, I've got a ticket." Jessie, 32, was not amused. She and Miles had traded barbs in the car over which route was correct, and the friction remained as we walked. Jessie had a sarcastic streak, a willingness to poke at someone's insecurities, and I'm pretty sure she thought Miles was a reckless liability. Taylor, on the other hand, was different. Quiet, watchful. She was 31, a friend of Jessie's. I didn't know her well. She had this calm presence, an almost shy demeanor, but something about her gaze felt piercing. She'd observe everything: the patterns on tree bark, the shape of clouds overhead, the direction of the wind. She'd occasionally crack a dark joke that, coming from her soft voice, would catch us off guard. I remember once, early in the hike, she glanced at a rotted stump and said, "It's like a mouth waiting to swallow our ankles." Then she just kept walking. The first half-day was enjoyable enough. The woods were thick, but the sun filtered through the canopy in golden beams that warmed the wet ground. Jasper occasionally whined, but I assumed it was just the excitement of new territory. We set up camp around mid-afternoon in a small clearing near a stream. Everyone was in good spirits, ignoring the lingering tension that always comes from being in close quarters with new people. Miles wanted to start a campfire, so he built a ring with stones while I gathered some wood. Jessie and Taylor set up tents, Jessie in one, Taylor in another, and Miles insisted on his own little one-man shelter. My dog and I would share a small, older tent I'd bought ages ago. I recalled the first odd incident. As soon as we tried lighting the fire, it refused to catch. The leaves and twigs were damp, so we tried whittling some kindling from drier wood. Still, it smoked and smoked, never quite igniting. Eventually, we gave up and used a portable camp stove to boil water for some freeze-dried meals. Disappointing, but we brushed it off. The wind was picking up anyway, and the temperature dropped fast at sunset. Things got stranger that night. Jasper woke me up, low, growling in his throat. At first, I thought he was dreaming, so I nudged him. Then I heard a voice outside. It sounded like a woman's voice. Jessie's or Taylor's, I couldn't tell. Quiet, whispering. The hair on my arms stood on end, but I forced myself to get up and unzip the tent. The moment I looked out, all I saw were tall pines swaying, their branches black shapes against a dim sky. The whispering stopped. I peered over at Jessie's tent. It was closed. Miles's tent also closed. And Taylor's, no one was out there. It was only about 2 a.m., so I reasoned maybe I'd heard the wind. Before I went back to bed, I noticed the moon seemed oddly high for the time. I remember checking my phone, but it was dead. I'd charged it to full right before leaving, but it showed a black screen, wouldn't even turn on. I wasn't panicked yet. Camping can do weird things to technology, especially in cold or damp conditions. I'll charge it with the power bank in the morning, I told myself. Still, I had that feeling of dread in my stomach. In the morning, Jessie swore she'd heard me pacing around the tents, muttering. I told her no, that I'd only poked my head out. She brushed it off with a laugh, but I could see she was unsettled. Then we discovered Miles's phone also had no battery. Taylor's, same thing. Our power banks, for some bizarre reason, wouldn't even give the little LED indicator. They were just dead lumps of plastic. The final insult? My sleeping bag was half unzipped from the inside. I knew I'd fully secured it the night before because it was cold. We broke camp, deciding to hike deeper along our planned loop. We figured we'd rely on Miles's map and my old compass if our phones refused to turn back on. The map was dog-eared, a bit outdated, but it should have been good enough for an established trail. We started walking, although the trail didn't look like I remembered from the route plan. The tree markings were faint. The undergrowth had taken over. Miles eventually pulled out his compass. I watched the needle spin once, twice, then settle. We trudged forward. An hour later, we found ourselves at the same clearing we'd just left. I recognized my own footprints. Miles tried to laugh it off. Jesse made a biting remark about stoned hikers. That turned into a heated argument. Miles insisted he wasn't high and that something else was messing with them. Eventually, we backtracked. The second time, we followed the stream hoping to avoid confusion with the winding trails. Jasper led the way, nose to the ground. And yet, the forest still seemed to twist around. We found fresh footprints, but none of us recognized them. Small footprints, almost child-sized, vanished near a group of trees that looked half-rotted. I thought maybe we'd stumbled upon old prints, but there was something fresh about them. The edges were too sharp, the ground still moist. We gave up on making big progress and camped near the water again, only a few miles from our first campsite. If we couldn't find the original loop, we'd cut the trip short and go back to the car the next day. After we set up camp, I remember feeling like the sun was going down too soon. Jesse commented that it was barely 3 in the afternoon, and yet the light had taken on that late evening hue, stretching the shadows. None of us had working watches or phones, so we guessed it was just the heavy cloud cover. That night is when things began to spiral. We tried again to start a fire. Same problem, wood wouldn't catch, or it would burn with weirdly colored flames. Greenish, sometimes a faint blue. We gave up, huddling around a small sputtering pile of tinder that gave just enough heat for comfort. Miles had grown jittery. He complained about hearing distant laughter in the trees. He kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes wide. Taylor was the opposite, unnervingly calm. She simply stared into the weak flames, blinking only occasionally. Jesse tried to make conversation about anything except our predicament. At some point, Taylor announced she'd go gather more wood before full darkness set in. She drifted off without waiting for a response. We let her go, not thinking much of it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Jessie checked her phone out of habit. Still dead, of course. Another half hour dragged by. No sign of Taylor. Finally, Miles said, "I'll go look for her." I wanted to volunteer, but I also felt like I should stay with Jessie, especially since Jasper was trembling by my leg. So Miles walked off alone, calling Taylor's name every so often. That left Jessie and me, and we waited in tense silence. Eventually, the dull chatter we tried to maintain dried up. Jasper whimpered again, his hackles raised. I stood to shine my flashlight into the surrounding woods, though the battery was weaker than it should have been. Every time I moved it across the tree line, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination. Another half hour passed, and then we heard branches snapping. I turned my flashlight beam toward the noise. There was Taylor, stumbling through the undergrowth with an armful of twigs. She looked up at us with an oddly wide smile, like she was relieved to see us, but the grin didn't drop. Her eyes seemed darker, as if the pupils were bigger than normal. She didn't say a word. She just walked straight into our clearing, dropped the wood in front of the smoldering fire and sat down. "Tay," Jessie said softly. "You okay? Where's Miles?" Taylor's smile flickered as if she had momentarily forgotten how to do it. She looked at Jessie in confusion. Then she turned to me. "Miles. Oh, he must still be out there." Her voice was distant. She shrugged and didn't elaborate. I got up, alarmed. "He went to look for you," I said. No reaction. I told Jesse to stay put with Taylor while I went to search for Miles. I took Jasper with me, hoping his nose would help. We trudged through thickening fog that clung low to the ground, weaving between mossy tree trunks. I called out for Miles over and over until my voice echoed oddly. The sound just didn't carry right. It felt swallowed by the forest. Jasper started whining, cowering against my leg. After maybe 15 minutes, I nearly tripped over something soft. My flashlight revealed Miles's backpack lying in the leaves. No sign of Miles himself. I unzipped the top of his pack. It was soaked inside with some brownish water, and every scrap of food had turned rancid, covered in black mold that smelled like death. Horrified, I zipped it shut, deciding I had to get back to camp. Maybe Miles was already there, or maybe Taylor could explain more once she'd warmed up. Jasper seemed terrified, tugging me forward like he wanted to run. When we returned, Taylor was in the same spot, the fire's dim glow flickering across her face. "Did you find him?" she asked, too calmly. She was still wearing that static expression, eyes large, lips parted. Her voice was now pitched slightly higher, an odd note. Jesse was kneeling near her, trembling. "No," I said, "but I found his pack. I didn't mention the rot inside, not yet." Jesse said, "Taylor's not making sense. She told me she lost track of time after she left. She keeps looking at me like she doesn't know who I am." I knelt down, shining the flashlight on Taylor's face. In the pale beam, she appeared more than disoriented. She looked vacant, like she was struggling to recall how to behave normally. I asked what happened. She started to explain. "I was just walking and I guess I forgot the way back. Then I heard your voice calling, so I followed it." Her mouth clamped shut, but her lips kept twitching. If I had to describe it, it's like her face was warring with itself, half grinning, half trying to speak. Finally, she managed, "I think we should go to bed. Everything will be fine in the morning." Jesse stared at me with fearful eyes. Neither of us believed that. But what else could we do at this point? We crawled into our tents, me with the Jasper, Jesse with Taylor. Jesse was too afraid to let Taylor out of her sight, so she insisted on sharing a tent. In hindsight, that was a grave mistake. I think I drifted off for a couple of hours, worn out and half frozen. I remember dreaming about my ex-wife, about the day we signed the divorce papers, how the world had felt like it collapsed. Then I awoke to a muffled noise, an impact, a gasp, then what sounded like choking. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped my tent. The night was still, no moonlight, just the faint glow of the ashes in the fire ring. I rushed over to Jesse's tent. It was partially collapsed. I saw movement inside, shadows wrestling. I pulled the flap open and my flashlight illuminated a scene I can't erase. Miles was inside, pinned beneath Taylor, eyes wide in terror, face turning purple as she pressed a knee into his throat. But that was impossible. Miles had never come back. And there he was, struggling silently. Taylor's face was contorted, her eyes rolled back, and she hissed like an animal. Jessie was at the edge of the tent, crumpled and barely conscious, a large bruise forming on her forehead. I lunged in and grabbed Taylor's shoulder, trying to yank her off Miles. She was impossibly strong. It took every ounce of effort to haul her away. She snarled at me, not like a human, but like a furious beast. Miles coughed, crawling away, desperately sucking in air. I shouted for Jasper, but my dog wouldn't come. Outside, I heard him growling in alarm. Jessie groaned, rubbing her head. She jumped me," she said, voice shaky. "Then Miles just walked in out of nowhere." Miles scrambled out of the tent, gagging and spitting. His eyes darted around in wild confusion. Before any of us could speak, Taylor tried to lunge at him again, this time diving forward with her arms outstretched. I managed to catch her around the waist. The only way to stop her was to throw her to the ground with as much force as I could muster. She landed on her left leg at a sick angle. We all heard the snap. She let out a monstrous shriek, not quite human, as if multiple voices layered together. Then, horrifyingly, she didn't cry, didn't clutch her leg. She just lay there with the bone protruding from the skin, smiling through the pain, lips drawn back too far. Miles was hyperventilating, unable to process what was happening. Jessie was sobbing. I kept the flashlight on Taylor, who panted, eyes rolling in her skull. Then she giggled, the sound echoing in the dark. "This body is so fragile," she muttered. Her voice kept shifting timbre, sometimes low, sometimes high. She tried to stand, and the broken leg twisted beneath her like a hinge in the wrong direction. I demanded to know who she was or what she was. Taylor, or the thing that wore her face, just gave me another grin. "I'm so hungry," it said. Then it looked up at me with a glare that was equal parts predatory and curious. "We all should eat. We've been out here so long, time got mixed up, we lost track." Miles stumbled backward, tripping over a tent stake. I glanced at him for a second, and in that time, Taylor dragged herself toward me, reaching for my ankle. I kicked out of reflex, striking her in the chin. I felt her jaw dislocate, a horrible pop. Yet she barely flinched, continuing her attempt to crawl onto me. Jessie shrieked, grabbed a half-burned log from the fire ring, and shoved it at Taylor's face. Sparks flew, Taylor's hair smoldered, the air filled with that sickening smell. She shrieked in a discordant, hollow way. I shouted, "Miles, help me!" But he was still reeling from shock. Finally, he got up and rushed forward, stomping on Taylor's hand. She let out a wail, retracting her limbs. Jessie tossed away the burning log, trembling so badly that she fell to her knees next to me. I could see in her eyes that she was wrestling with the reality of what we'd just done. At that moment, the idea of subduing Taylor or helping her was overshadowed by pure survival instinct. We had no working phones to call for help, no easy path to civilization. We decided to tie her up, ignoring her broken leg for the moment, because the alternative was letting her roam free. Miles grabbed some rope from his pack and, with little coordination, we hog-tied her arms and legs. She still grinned at us, tears streaming down her face. But the tears were thick and dark, maybe blood. I can't say for sure, she never tried to fight us once we bound her. She only giggled and occasionally hissed, even as she lay in the dirt, her leg twisted unnaturally. It was then we saw that one of her eyes had become milky, as though covered by a film. She whispered something about the hollow tree and repeated it. "He wants us at the hollow tree." None of us understood. Jessie's voice was shaky as she asked Taylor what that meant. The thing wearing Taylor's face just repeated, "He wants us at the hollow tree," then smiled. "He wants all of you in one place." Miles, shock limp, said quietly, "We need to go. Now." We debated whether we could carry Taylor out or if we should leave her. Jessie was adamant that we couldn't abandon her, that this might just be some kind of psychosis. Miles raged that it was something else, something wearing Taylor. He pointed out that we couldn't get more than a mile or two carrying her. We had no phone, no rescue beacon. In the end, I decided we had to try to get help, even if it meant splitting up. That was when we discovered we might already have been too late. We heard Jasper's frantic barking. Then a yelp. I sprinted toward the sound with my flashlight, shining into the blackness. The barking stopped abruptly. All I found was his collar, torn in half, and a few spatters of blood on the surrounding leaves. I called his name over and over, searching for any sign. Nothing. I stumbled back to camp, heart in my throat, fighting tears. Miles was pacing, ranting about how none of this was normal. Jessie was pale, one hand pressed over her mouth. Taylor was silent now, arms bound behind her back. The smell of burnt hair lingered in the clearing. Is Jasper gone?" Jessie asked quietly, already knowing the answer. I nodded. "We can't stay here," I said. "We have to keep moving. The longer we wait, the worse this gets." Miles suggested we head in the direction we came from and find the car. We grabbed what we could carry, minimal gear, water, first aid. Then we realized something horrific. Our remaining food, still in our packs, had turned to rot overnight. Fruit, jerky, even sealed dehydrated packets were covered in black mold. It was as if weeks or months had passed inside our backpacks in a single night. The stench was unbearable. With no food, a possessed or corrupted Taylor, and an unknown entity seemingly stalking us, we made the only choice we could. Keep moving. We cut a makeshift crutch for Taylor from a branch. Her broken leg was basically useless, but she kept insisting in her own voice now that she could walk, that she wanted to help. Her tone was subdued, almost conciliatory. She kept mumbling, I'm sorry. But sometimes she'd slip and start smiling again. That strange grin that reached too far. The entire next day was a haze of fear and confusion. We tried to retrace our steps to the car, but the trail was unrecognizable, twisted, or simply gone. At one point, we found a footbridge that was definitely not on any map we'd studied, and it led to a thick part of the woods where pine needles blanketed the forest floor in a soft, nauseating layer. The deeper we went, the more disoriented we became. My compass seemed stuck. The needle pointed steadily in one direction, no matter how I turned. That night, we made a small camp, more out of necessity than logic. We had run out of water at some point, but we found a stream that tasted slightly metallic. We drank anyway. As we tried to rest, we realized the last traces of sunset were gone in what felt like minutes. The sense of time was slipping. We'd doze off for what felt like hours, only to find the sky still pitch black. Or we'd think we slept just minutes, only to see dawn threatening in the east. My sense of exhaustion reached a point of delirium. Sometime around dawn, I was jolted awake by a guttural scream. Miles had bolted upright, eyes filled with panic. He shouted Jessie's name, and we saw that her sleeping bag lay empty. The zipper was undone from the inside. She was gone. No sign of a struggle. We called her name, scattering into the surrounding forest in a desperate search, ignoring the danger. After maybe 20 minutes, we heard her shrieking. A wild, frantic sound. We sprinted to find her. There she was, near a large, gnarled tree with a hollowed-out trunk. She was on the ground, gripping at pine needles, trying to pull herself away from the trunk. Her shirt was torn, and she had scratches all over her arms as though she'd been dragged. She looked up, eyes wild. "It tried to take me," she gasped. "I woke up out here, it was pulling me inside." I helped her to her feet, trembling with relief. But as soon as I looked at the hollow trunk, a wave of revulsion slammed into me. A sticky black substance was dripping from the hollow, almost like sap, but it reeked like rotting meat. Miles pulled Jessie away from it. Her face was smeared with tears and dirt. Before we could move further, we heard Taylor's voice. She was standing a short distance away, leaning heavily on her makeshift crutch, eyes locked on the tree. "Doesn't it feel familiar?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Don't you want to see what's inside?" That bizarre grin slid across her face again. Her broken leg didn't seem to cause her pain. She took one step forward, then another, that dislocated limb dragging behind her. "Stop!" I snapped, stepping between her and the tree. She looked up at me with a strange mix of pity and hunger. Then she lunged, jabbing her crutch straight into my stomach. The end of it was sharpened now. Miles hadn't cut it that way. I just barely avoided getting impaled, but the impact knocked me down. Miles tried to tackle her. She swung the crutch with surprising speed. It caught him in the arm, slicing open his sleeve and the flesh beneath. Jessie, half in shock, screamed. I climbed to my feet, ignoring my bruised ribs, and charged, spearing Taylor in the side. We tumbled to the ground. I felt something crack again in her broken leg, a nauseating crunch. She hissed in my ear, "Time to feed the tree." I pinned her with my weight, struggling to keep her from wriggling loose. Miles stumbled over, bleeding from the arm. He tried to help, but Taylor whipped her head up and sank her teeth into the flesh of his hand. He howled, and blood splattered. Jessie, trembling in terror, found a rock the size of a melon and smashed it down onto Taylor's forearm. The crack was deafening. Taylor shrieked, releasing Miles. Then she started convulsing. That was when we saw something beneath her skin shift, as if a snake was crawling inside her. Her eyes flickered to black. She stared at me in horrifying clarity. "Why do you run, Daniel?" she said in my voice. "You've run from everything, your marriage, your life. It all ended here anyway." She laughed, a strangled sound. Then, in one savage motion, she jerked up from the ground, sending me tumbling backward. Her arms, broken in places, flailed unnaturally. Jessie shrieked for me to get away. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. I saw that the only choice was to do what was necessary. We couldn't help Taylor, not like this. She was attacking us. She'd nearly killed Miles. She'd possibly killed my dog. I grabbed the crutch from the ground, the sharper end tinted with my own blood. Taylor's grin faltered for the first time, and I drove it into her chest. A hideous screech tore from her throat. Then she went still, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a silent "oh" of shock. A blackish ichor dribbled from the wound. She trembled, coughed something wet, and finally collapsed. Jessie sobbed, collapsing against a tree. Miles was shaking, the wound on his hand seeping blood. For a few seconds, none of us moved. We realized we'd just killed her, or killed whatever had been inside her. Then, with a soft gurgle, Taylor's eyes rolled back, and she fell limp. We didn't have time to process our guilt and horror. The trunk of the hollow tree behind us emitted a wet, sucking sound. A thick, black sap oozed out, puddling onto the ground. I got a whiff of rancid rot. The bark seemed to pulsate as if it had veins. Fear overcame reason, and we decided then that we had to destroy it, whatever it was. If it was responsible for this infection or possession, maybe we could end it. Maybe we could free Taylor's soul or keep it from spreading to us. Miles rummaged through his pack, found a half-empty bottle of camp stove fuel. I still had a flare in my bag. We doused the trunk with the liquid, choking from the chemical fumes mingling with the putrid stench. Jessie steadied herself, tears streaming down her cheeks, and lit the flare for me. The bright red spark illuminated the clearing like a hellish beacon. I held it to the tree. The flames caught in a whoosh, shooting up the trunk in hungry tongues. The hollow screeched. The tree literally screamed. I know how insane that sounds. But the wood splintered, releasing a high-pitched wail. The black sap burst into sizzling pockets that spat embers at us. Jessie had to back away, covering her face. As the trunk burned, we saw shapes flicker inside the hollow, shadows that looked vaguely human, some with 2 long arms, some with no eyes. One of those shapes had the silhouette of a dog. My stomach churned. Everything began to tremble, like an earthquake localized to our clearing. Miles shouted that we had to run. Jessie and I backed away as flames spread to the nearby brush. The heat was intense. The stench of burning rot overwhelmed me. In the chaos, I caught a final glimpse of Taylor's body lying on the ground, limbs contorted. Her eyes had opened again, and she was silently mouthing something, reaching one twisted arm toward the fire as if drawn to it. The next moments blurred. We ran, half stumbling, half carrying each other. Miles's wounded hand bled, and we bandaged it as best as we could with scraps of cloth. Jessie was exhausted and covered in bruises. My own ribs felt cracked. We just kept moving, spurred by fear that the forest itself would swallow us if we stopped. We found a slope descending toward a creek, maybe a mile away, maybe more, but it felt like a lifetime. It was dawn by then, or what passed for dawn in that cursed place. The final hours in the wilderness are broken fragments in my memory. I recall hearing a distant voice that sounded like Jasper barking. I recall seeing the burned tree trunk in my mind's eye, flickering with mocking images of Taylor's grin. My eyelids were so heavy and my mind felt unmoored from reality. Maybe it was the drain of adrenaline. Maybe it was the unnatural environment. All I know is that we eventually reached a less dense area of forest near the water, and that's where everything fades. I must have collapsed. I woke up in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm. A man in a park ranger uniform was at my side, along with a medic and a local sheriff's deputy. They said I'd stumbled out to a ranger station near Elk Lake Creek, incoherent and dehydrated. They asked where the others were. I remember whispering something about a hollow tree, about how I couldn't save them. I heard them exchange worried glances. I blacked out again. Later, I was told that a search party went into that area. They found burnt ground and a partially collapsed trunk that looked like it had been struck by lightning. They found some scattered camping gear. They never found Miles, Jessie, or Taylor. All they recovered was one camera, buried in the ash. The memory card was partially intact, though the footage was bizarre. They said it showed me sitting alone in a campsite, talking and laughing with 4 other versions of me around a fire that was barely smoldering. No sign of Miles, Jessie, or Taylor on the tape. No dog either. The investigators chalked it up to camera malfunction or tampering. My burns and injuries healed slowly, but the mental scars remain. Authorities questioned me repeatedly. They suspected foul play or a mental break that led to some tragedy in the woods. I had no answers. The nightmares haven't stopped. There are nights when I wake up, certain I hear that voice whispering my name outside my window. Sometimes my phone inexplicably dies, even though it was at full charge. In those moments, my hand unconsciously drifts to the small scars on my forearm, tiny scratches that look like claw marks. I don't remember exactly when or how I got them, and I keep expecting to see Jasper trot up to me with that anxious wag, but he never does. I won't go back to Bull of the Woods. I can't. And every night before I try to sleep, I think about the last thing I saw in that clearing. The way the hollow trunk pulsed with a rotten life, the way Taylor's body twitched as if it might get back up, and how the forest seemed to twist time around us, devouring us piece by piece. Even with the fire, I'm not sure we ended it. Maybe it spread somewhere else, or maybe it waits there, waiting for someone new. I've tried to move on, but the investigators and doctors can't provide any comforting answers. They've mentioned possible post-traumatic stress, delusions from hunger and dehydration, or some hallucinogenic fungus in the area. But none of that explains the footprints that didn't match ours, the rotting food, or the bizarre footage on that camera. None of it explains the feeling that I left part of myself out there, and whatever took it might come looking one day. I have recurring nightmares of walking down a twisting path, time slipping past in flickers of day and night. In the dream, I see a broken silhouette crawling after me. When it grabs my ankle, it looks up, and it's me, my face, contorted, eyes empty. It whispers, "We lost track." I wake up every time drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Then the lights will flicker and my phone battery will read 0%, and I'll wonder if it's a sign. I don't have closure. I don't even know if Jesse or Miles might be out there, still alive, warped by that presence. And if Taylor is dead, was she ever truly herself in those final moments? The official record states unsolved missing persons case. But I know what I saw. Part of me fears that the spirit we faced wasn't the only one of its kind. Part of me fears that time in that place might still be broken, warping, letting them all roam indefinitely, half alive, half consumed. And part of me hopes that the fire was enough to burn it all away. But every time I see a rotted stump in the woods or smell something sweet and foul, I remember that hollow tree, the black sap, and that voice hissing in the darkness. We shouldn't have ventured there. We should have turned back at the first sign of something wrong. But there's no undoing it now. I sit here in the glow of a single lamp in my small apartment, writing this down so that maybe someone will believe me, or at least heed my warning. Don't chase solitude in those cursed corners of the wilderness if you aren't ready for what might be waiting. I wasn't ready. None of us were. And that place, or that thing, knew it. It used our ignorance, our insecurities, even our guilt to tear us apart. Or maybe it was all just a game to it, playing with our sense of time and place until we had nowhere to run. The doctors say I might get better, that I'll move on. But at night, I'm sure I can still hear the forest calling. Sometimes I'll stand at the window, phone in hand, looking into the dark, and for a split second I see the silhouette of a figure on the sidewalk. Is it a stranger? Or is it me, again? Some reflection of me that never escaped that hollow trunk. I shut the curtain quickly, heart racing. So far, it hasn't come knocking, but I'm always waiting for that day. Maybe I'll be old and gray, or maybe it'll be tomorrow. One day, it could find me. I sense it, and when it does, I suspect time will break once more, leaving me exactly where I started. Lost, alone, and trapped in the hungry shadows of Bull of the Woods. My name is Eleanor Price, and I was 36 years old when this happened in mid-September of last year. I had just finished driving my vintage 1979 Airstream RV into a place called Dry Creek Valley, not far from Mitchell, Oregon, in the John Day River Territory. I'd heard rumors of a ghost town, rumored hot springs, and an expanse of high desert that supposedly became spectacular at sunrise. I was on a mission to photograph these spots for my little travel blog, the one I'd hoped would become a new career after I quit my old advertising job in Portland. I wasn't fleeing from anything as dramatic as heartbreak or tragedy, I just couldn't do the city anymore. I told myself I needed fresh air, quiet roads, and that sense of possibility you only get traveling alone. I drove in on a Wednesday morning, the sun already glaring across dusty hills. My Airstream rattled along a single-lane stretch of broken asphalt that turned into grated dirt. The area felt simultaneously wide open and claustrophobic. Towering rock formations loomed on both sides like watchers. The ground was a tapestry of dry brush, sage, and straggling juniper trees. Cell reception vanished somewhere outside Mitchell. I thought it was perfect, just me, my RV, my camera. I craved that isolation. Even so, I had no idea how alone I'd soon feel. Around midday, I came upon a rusted metal sign for a place called Dry Creek. Only half the lettering remained, riddled with bullet holes. The road forked unexpectedly. Left was paved, barely, and presumably led to what might once have been the main drag. Right was a dusty track that disappeared behind scrubby hills. My GPS had been glitchy for miles, telling me to proceed to the route in a robotic loop. Eventually, it froze entirely. I tried to reboot it, but the screen stayed black. I parked for a moment, scanning the horizon. No other vehicles in sight. My phone was at half battery. When I checked the map I downloaded, the entire area was basically a blank spot with faint old roads and no updated detail. I laughed quietly, thinking I'd gotten exactly what I asked for. Uncharted territory. So I eased the RV onto the dirt track, hoping to find a scenic spot to boondock for a couple of days. About 20 minutes later, I spotted an old ranch-style gate, swung open, with private property stenciled on a board. On the other side of the gate, the land seemed empty and silent. A little pang of guilt told me maybe I shouldn't trespass, but the gate wasn't locked, and I figured no one would mind me parking for just a night or two. I didn't see a single structure beyond that opening, so I pressed on, the dust swirling around my wheels. I followed the track up a gentle slope. When it leveled out, I saw scattered hints of civilization. A broken wooden fence, an abandoned shed, an old well overgrown by tumbleweeds. A narrow creek bed snaked between scraggly cottonwood trees. I parked near the creek, balancing the RV on relatively flat ground, and hopped out to stretch my legs. The midday sun felt scorching, but oddly quiet. No birds, no rustle of small animals. Just the breeze. The first person I met was an old man. I'd been outside my RV for about half an hour, snapping pictures of the half-collapsed shed, when I turned and nearly jumped out of my skin. He was standing about 10 yards behind me, watching. He wore a dusty cowboy hat pulled low, a flannel shirt, and ancient jeans. One of his eyes was clouded over with cataracts, and the other had a dull intensity that pinned me in place. I waved, forcing a smile. "Oh, hello. I didn't realize anyone lived around here. I'm Eleanor Price, Ellie for short." He nodded slowly, as if considering my words. Finally, in a reedy voice, he said, "Name's Harlan. You from Portland?" When I nodded, he scowled slightly. "A lot of you folks come out this way searching for pictures to post, or peace, or both." "I'm just passing through," I assured him, hoping to do a little camping. "I can move if this is private property." Something about his expression made me uneasy. "You can stay," he said, "but keep your lights off at night. Wind's been strange this harvest season." Then, as if the conversation was over, he reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a small cloth pouch, and handed it to me. The cloth was rough, tied with twine, and inside was a handful of coarse salt. "Sprinkle that around your tires," he instructed. "Keeps out the bad harvest winds." His voice was so matter-of-fact that I didn't dare question it. I thanked him, mostly to be polite, and asked if there was a store or gas station nearby. He stared, silent for a long moment, then said, "Nearest pumps are in Mitchell, about an hour that way, and watch the roads. They wind back on themselves. Been that way a while." He tipped his hat and ambled off. Within a minute, he'd vanished behind a stand of cottonwoods. I looked at the pouch of salt and half laughed at my situation. This was exactly the kind of experience I wanted. A weird local story, some pictures of dusty fields at sundown, maybe a short blog post about the eccentricities of rural Oregon. So I followed the old man's suggestion. I sprinkled a few grains of salt around my tires, feeling silly and superstitious. Then I set about organizing my campsite. By late afternoon, the temperature had cooled a bit. I set up my portable chair and a tiny table outside, rummaged for a can of soup from the RV's pantry, and heated it on my stove inside. My phone battery was at 20%, but with no service, I switched to airplane mode to save power for taking photos. As I ate, I felt watched again, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe Harlan was still nearby. After dinner, I ventured out to walk along the creek. The setting sun painted the sky in reds and oranges across the rolling desert hills. I took a bunch of photos, proud of the vibrant colors. Maybe I hoped this trip would jumpstart my blog's popularity. On my way back to the RV, I spotted a small figure standing near it, a child. She looked around 10, with long braids and a faded yellow dress. I couldn't see her face at first. "Hello," I called, trying to sound friendly. "You live around here?" She turned toward me. She had wide, dark eyes that reminded me of a porcelain doll, almost too large for her face. She didn't say anything, just studied me. Slowly, she lifted a hand in a wave. Her nails were dirty, her arms smudged with dust. "What's your name?" I asked, approaching carefully. She looked so out of place, a kid in the middle of nowhere, alone at dusk. Finally, she spoke. "Kira." Her voice was timid, like she wasn't used to speaking. "Hi, Kira," I said. "I'm Ellie. Are your parents around?" She tilted her head as though she didn't understand. Then she pointed to the sun dipping below the horizon. "You should keep the lights off," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away, silent as a ghost. I called after her a few times, but she disappeared around the same cottonwoods Harlan had. This was definitely a strange place, but I still chalked it all up to local quirks. Maybe the lights thing was a local superstition. I carried on. I closed up my RV door, locked it, and decided to catch up on reading before bed. Night in the desert can be breathtaking. Stars blanketed the sky in a dazzling display, and the temperature plummeted. I flicked on the interior lights of the Airstream to set up my bed, but as soon as I did, a fierce gust of wind rattled the entire vehicle. My overhead lamp flickered. The wind died as quickly as it came. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Then I remembered Kira's caution. "Keep the lights off." I found it silly, but I couldn't help feeling an irrational urge to comply. I turned them off, lit a small lantern, and told myself it was just that desert wind everyone warns you about. I was exhausted from the day's drive, so I turned in early. That night, though, I couldn't sleep well. I heard odd, scraping noises on the side of the RV, as if someone was brushing the metal with bristly weeds. Occasionally, a dull thump would shake the walls. It might have been the wind or an animal. I tried to ignore it, but around 2 a.m. I sat bolt upright to the sound of a child's giggle, distorted like it came through an old radio. My heart pounded. I flicked on my lantern, scanned the interior. I was alone. The giggling stopped. Somehow, I drifted off eventually. In the morning, I woke up feeling like I'd hardly slept at all. I tried to make coffee with the percolator on my propane stove, but the flame sputtered weirdly, like it was burning wet fuel. The coffee came out scorched. Then I discovered the container of fresh fruit I'd brought from home was covered in a white, powdery mold, as if it had sat in a hot closet for weeks. I cursed my luck, chucked it all into a plastic bag, and sealed it tight. One more minor inconvenience, at least the rest of my food seemed fine. I opened a can of peaches for breakfast, took some pictures of the morning sun, and planned to drive deeper into the valley for more exploring. When I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The starter clicked, the engine coughed, but it never turned over. The battery gauge read normal, so it shouldn't have been dead. I popped the hood, as if I had any real mechanical knowledge, and stared at the engine. Everything looked intact. No chewed wires from rodents, no obvious breaks. I tried again, click, click, nothing. Great, I was stuck, at least for the moment. I stepped outside and rummaged through my gear for an emergency jump starter, though it typically wouldn't help if the battery gauge was fine. As I was doing that, a pickup truck rattled over the ridge. Relief flooded me. Maybe someone from the nearest farm or ranch. The truck pulled up and 2 people hopped out. A middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as Jonah and Marlene Cobb. They had warm smiles and wore old-fashioned clothes, Marlene in a long skirt, Jonah in suspenders. Even their posture felt out of another era. They asked if I needed help, and I explained the RV wouldn't start. Jonah grabbed his own tools, poked around under my hood, muttering that everything looked functional. He even used a battery booster. Still, the engine refused to start. Finally, he shrugged. Could be the starter motor. I can take a look at it in my workshop, but I'd need to haul your RV there. The notion of them towing the entire airstream made me uneasy. Marlene laid a gentle hand on my forearm. We have a place just up the way, she offered. You can stay with us until you get your RV fixed. We have plenty of space and hot food. Her smile was genuine, almost motherly, but I felt that same uneasy tingle as with Harlan and Kira. Still, refusing their help while stranded seemed ridiculous. I said I'd be grateful for a ride. She handed me a jar of canned peaches. Our specialty, she said. Reminds me of last season's guest, too. I asked about the last season's guest. Jonah and Marlene exchanged a look. He was passing through, Jonah said. Wanted to see the ghost town. We took him in, good fellow. They didn't elaborate. I tried to push aside my discomfort. I insisted on gathering a few personal items from the RV. Wallet, phone, camera, a change of clothes. My phone still had no signal. Jonah and I fiddled with the Airstream's battery one more time with no success. Then, in a burst of generosity or maybe desperation, I told them, "Actually, do you have a landline? Maybe I can call a tow truck for Mitchell to come haul the RV out." Jonah shook his head. "Out here. Nothing but static on the lines right now. Must be the season." That season remark again. I wondered if that was code for something. With little choice, I locked up the RV, stowed the keys in my pocket, and climbed into the back of their pickup. The entire drive, they were polite, Marlene asking about my blog, Jonah telling me about how the valley used to be livelier. I got the sense they were devoutly old-fashioned, maybe practicing some offshoot of a local religious sect. They occasionally mentioned the harvest, always in hushed, reverent tones. Their property was a small farmstead nestled behind a crest in the land I would never have known was there. A few goats milled around a pen, and there was a large barn. The farmhouse was modest, with peeling white paint. Nearby, I saw a second structure, a small one-room chapel that looked half-burned. The roof had collapsed, black char streaking the walls. Strangely, they kept the remnants of the steeple intact, as if it were a monument. Jonah parked, got out, and opened my door. "We'll be good hosts," he said. "Marlene'll make sure you're well fed while I see what I can do about your engine." I tried to protest I should help, but he insisted, so Marlene led me into the house. The living room was cramped with old furniture. The wallpaper was a faded floral, and the place smelled of dust and homemade preserves. She offered me a seat, then bustled into the kitchen. Through an open door, I glimpsed shelves lined with dozens of mason jars, peaches, pears, tomatoes. I realized it all smelled faintly fermented. As I waited, I tried to check my phone for any faint signal. Still nothing. The phone's battery icon dropped from 18% to 5% in a single minute. It made no sense. I was about to switch it off when I heard a creaking floorboard behind me. I turned to see a small figure. For a second, my heart jumped, but it wasn't Kira. It was a wiry man in overalls, maybe in his 40s, standing in the hallway, watching me with big, unblinking eyes. He said nothing, and I managed a timid hi. He blinked once, seemed to mouth something, and then retreated down the hallway. I wasn't sure if he lived there or was just another visitor. Marlene returned with a bowl of stew, thick, murky, with chunks of what looked like potato and some pale meat. I tried a bite, not wanting to be rude, but my stomach flipped. It was too salty, the texture rubbery. I forced a smile and set it aside. Jonah appeared in the doorway. "Ellie, I'll need a bit more time. Gonna hitch up a tow chain tomorrow morning and see if we can bring the RV in. That all right?" I nodded, worried. "Any chance you could drive me to Mitchell? I need to call a mechanic." He gave me a regretful look. "I can do that in a couple of days after we finish up some harvest chores. But you can stay with us for now. We have a spare bedroom in the barnhouse loft if you don't mind the goats at night." Something in the tone of his voice felt final, as if I didn't have a say. My discomfort spiked, but the day was wearing on, and I didn't relish the idea of trudging 10 or more miles in the desert heat. Trying to keep my cool, I agreed to spend the night. Jonah's relief was evident. Marlene suggested I get fresh air. "There's a fine spring out back if you want to see it," she said with a sugary smile. "Kira might be there." I paused. "The same Kira? The little girl?" I asked if Kira was their daughter. Marlene shrugged. "She's around, been around for years." That answer didn't exactly help my sense of unease. I went outside, following a narrow path behind the farmhouse. Tall grass swayed in the breeze, and a faint sound of trickling water grew louder. Sure enough, I found a small natural spring behind some large boulders. As I approached, I noticed footprints in the muddy bank. Child-sized footprints. No adult prints around them. I called out softly, "Kira?" No reply. A moment later, I heard hushed giggling from behind a rock. I circled around and, sure enough, there was Kira. She was crouched low, stirring a stick in the water. Her braids hung limply, and she looked up with that wide stare. "You came," she said, as if she'd been expecting me. Are you staying with the Cobbs?" I asked, trying to piece together the relationships. She shook her head. "No, they don't see me," she whispered. "Only you see me, and Harlan sometimes." That made my stomach flip in confusion. "But Marlene said you might be here," I pressed. Kira shrugged, and I was struck again by the sense that she was only half present, almost ghostly. She stood, water dripping from her hands, and walked right past me. A cold dread crawled through my body. Her footsteps left no fresh prints. It was as if the prior ones had been there for days. She paused by the tall grass. "When the harvest time comes, they feed him. Anyone who wanders in, they make him strong." Her voice was so quiet I had to lean closer. "I saw them bury a man once, feed him to the dirt. Harlan tried to help, but he's too old now." My heart hammered. None of this made any sense. "Feed who?" I asked, though I didn't want to hear the answer. She stared back with that porcelain gaze. "The buried husband," she said, as if reciting a nursery rhyme. "He wakes up in the dryness. He's hungry. They give him travelers so they can have a good harvest. If they don't, the ground goes bad." I opened my mouth to question her further, but a shrill goat bleat startled me. I turned, and when I looked back, Kira was gone. The footprints remained. My stomach twisted. Maybe it was all local folklore. I told myself not to panic, but the back of my neck tingled. I hurried away from the spring, returning to the barn area to see if my RV had arrived or if Jonah was still tinkering. The sun was dipping low, bathing the farmland in a golden haze. Jonah was in front of the barn, rummaging in a tool chest. When he saw me, he forced another big smile, though I noticed tension in his eyes. "You find the spring?" he asked. I just nodded. "Everything okay?" I ventured. He paused, then said, "Of course. This year's harvest is important for all of us here." Then, as if to change the subject, he asked, "Need anything from your RV before night falls?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'd just like to go back to my RV. I'm not sure I feel comfortable." He shook his head. "Night's coming fast, and the roads are tricky. Besides, your RV might not be the safest place right now. Coyotes. Worse. I can show you your loft in the barn." I felt a flash of anger. "I'm an adult. I can decide where I sleep." His expression hardened, the forced politeness cracking. "Miss Price, do as we ask. It'll be easier." There was a hint of threat in his voice that made my blood run cold. I considered running away on foot, but I saw nowhere to go, no guarantee I'd find my way out in the dark. Reluctantly, I let him lead me into the barn. Inside, goats milled about, the air thick with hay and musk. Up a rickety ladder was a cramped loft with a small cot. No windows, just slivers of moonlight through gaps in the boards. Jonah lit a lantern for me, then climbed back down without a word. I sat on the cot, hugging my knees. If I was going to get out, it would have to be in the morning. I still clung to the hope that maybe they were just eccentric farmers with weird traditions, that Kira was a local kid telling spooky tales. But deep down, I sensed real danger. I switched on my phone, ignoring the low battery warning, hoping to at least record a voice note if I couldn't call out. My phone's camera app opened by mistake, and in the lantern light, I saw my own reflection on the screen, pale, eyes wide with fear. Then the phone died altogether. I lay down, fully clothed, heart racing. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep. Dreams of a man buried alive in a dusty pit with a rasping breath that reverberated under my feet haunted me. I heard chanting, saw lumps of earth move. I woke up in a cold sweat to total darkness. The lantern had gone out. I groped for my flashlight, flicked it on. The goats below were silent, and the night felt ominously still. A sudden scrape echoed from below. My heart hammered. Another scrape, then a heavy shuffle of footsteps. I leaned over the loft edge, shining my beam down. In the dancing light, I saw the wiry man in overalls, the one I'd glimpsed in the hallway, standing in the barn aisle. His eyes reflected the flashlight beam weirdly, almost like an animal's. He clutched a pitchfork. I froze, trying not to breathe. He whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Then he turned his face up, and I saw that his lips parted in a trembling, unnatural grin. He hissed, "He's already beneath us." Before I could respond, he slammed the pitchfork into the barn floor with a dull thud, and I realized there was a thin layer of dry soil there, not just wooden planks. A wave of disgust washed over me. Why was there soil on the floor? The goats bleated in sudden panic, scattering to the corners of the barn. The wiry man hissed again, turned, and stumbled out into the night. I didn't dare move. I stayed crouched, trembling, trying to keep my flashlight beam still. The goats eventually settled, but my adrenaline soared. Sometime later, exhaustion overtook me again, and I dozed off, the flashlight clutched in my hand. When morning came, I was awakened by the sound of Jonah calling from the barn doorway. "Breakfast," he announced. "Come on down." His tone was cheery, but I heard the undercurrent of tension. Slowly, I climbed down, feigning compliance. My mind was in overdrive, planning an escape. I needed my RV or a car or something to get out of here. If I left on foot, I feared I'd wander the desert for days. Jonah led me to the farmhouse kitchen, where Marlene had set out biscuits and jam. My stomach roiled at the smell of their food. I pretended to nibble, all the while scanning for a phone or radio. There was a landline phone on the wall, an old rotary model, but the cord was severed. Marlene noticed me looking at it and gave me a thin smile. "Only static," she said, as if reading my mind. I forced a polite question. "How's the harvest going?" Marlene's eyes gleamed. "Oh, the harvest is bountiful this year," she replied. "We just need to keep the buried husband satisfied so the fields remain fertile." She said it so casually, like discussing the weather. My throat tightened. So, Kira's story was true. They had some horrifying ritual they believed in. Jonah set down his mug of coffee. "Let's see about your RV," he said with exaggerated warmth. "Marlene, we'll be back for midday meal." She nodded, and I had no choice but to follow Jonah outside, where I saw a beat-up truck hooked to a trailer. He pointed me to the passenger seat. "Hop in," he said. "We'll fetch your rig." I tried to keep my composure. On the drive out, I secretly mapped the route in my head, left at the orchard right at the boulders. Soon we arrived at my campsite by the creek, but something was off. The place looked more overgrown, as if a month had passed. Weeds had sprouted around the RV's tires, which made no sense in a single day. My footprints from before were gone, replaced by new random scuffs in the dust. Jonah unhitched the trailer and hopped out. "I'll take a look." He fiddled with the Airstream door. I realized he had my key, though I didn't recall giving it to him. My stomach sank. "Wait, Jonah, how did you—" He waved off my concern and disappeared inside. I stepped around to check the engine. The hood was open, wires scattered. It looked more tampered with than broken. I was about to lean in when a mewling sound caught my ear. I looked behind the RV and nearly screamed. The ground was littered with rotted scraps of something unrecognizable. Maybe small animal remains. Or... I inhaled sharply. The stench was like decay. Then Jonah called from inside, "Miss Price? Mind coming in here? Something you should see." My instinct screamed not to go, but maybe this was my chance to salvage the engine. I crept up the steps. Inside, my RV was in shambles. The carefully stored supplies had been ripped apart. My bed was torn, my extra clothes strewn around, my canned goods. Oh God, they were all black with mold, as if they'd been left for months in extreme heat. The walls had streaks of some oily residue. The place reeked of rot. Jonah stood near the kitchenette with a smug expression. "Told you it might not be safe," he drawled. "Time moves strange here. Things spoil quicker if you're not careful." I staggered back, my horror replaced by adrenaline. "Let me go," I spat. "I'll walk back to Mitchell if I have to." Jonah tilted his head, as if pitying me. "It doesn't work that way, Ellie. The roads lead back here. We all feed him. It's part of the bargain." He advanced, and I grabbed the first thing I could, my small pot from the stove. I hurled it at him. He dodged, lunging forward. In the cramped space, I couldn't evade him. His arm locked around my waist, dragging me toward the door. I screamed, kicked, but he was stronger. As we reached the door, I glimpsed Kira standing in the brush outside, staring. She didn't move to help, just watched. Before Jonah could yank me off the steps, I raked his face with my nails. He roared, letting go. I stumbled out of the RV, nearly tripping on the steps. Kira had vanished again. I ran around to the front, heart pounding, scanning for a weapon. Jonah stormed out, wiping blood from his cheek. I saw the truck was still running. A wild idea seized me. If the keys were in the ignition. Without hesitation, I sprinted. Jonah realized my plan too late. I flung the passenger door open, dove across the seat, and jammed the gearshift into drive. The truck lurched forward. Jonah lunged for me through the open door, but I floored the gas pedal, and the truck tore away, dragging the trailer behind it in a cloud of dust. I clutched the steering wheel, barely able to see through the dusty windshield. Behind me, Jonah yelled something unintelligible. I didn't care. I had to get out. The trailer careened, threatening to flip. The road branched. I took the main path back the way we'd come. But the track twisted and turned in ways I didn't recognize. Once, I passed what looked like the same orchard I'd seen earlier. Then I saw that bullet-riddled dry creek sign, but from the wrong side, as if I'd circled around. My heart hammered. I kept driving, determined. The truck coughed, engine sputtering. I cursed, willing it to keep going. Then, ahead, the path forked. The left track led to more hills, the right to a narrow gorge. The truck sputtered again, and the engine died. I coasted to a stop. Fear rose. I was in some unknown bend of the canyon, surrounded by towering rock walls. I jumped out of the truck, leaving the trailer behind. On foot, I scrambled up a slope to see if I could spot a highway or something beyond. But at the top, I found only another dusty plateau. The midday sun was oppressively hot. No sign of Jonah behind me, but I heard the wind moaning across the rocks, as if whispering, "He's coming." My lips were cracked with thirst. I realized I'd left my water in the barn. With no better option, I picked a direction and walked. I lost track of time. My head pounded, eyes stinging with sweat. Everything seemed to shift. Sometimes the sun was overhead, sometimes it felt like hours had passed and the light was fading. That sense of disorientation plagued me until I stumbled upon a burned structure, an old chapel steeple. My heart sank. I had somehow circled right back to the Cobb's property. The farmland stretched below me like a stage, the barn and farmhouse visible. I cursed under my breath, raw desperation settling in. I hid behind some rocks until dusk. My mouth was bone dry. I debated sneaking into the house for water, but that was suicide if they were all there. My gaze drifted to the half-burned chapel. Maybe I could find something in there, shelter or a clue. Once the sky dimmed to twilight, I crept down the slope, careful not to be seen. I circled around the farmland until I reached the chapel's charred doorway. Inside, the air was stale. A portion of the roof remained, black beams crossing overhead. The floor was dirt, like the barn, oddly so. I swept my flashlight around. In the corner, an old podium lay smashed. Pews were stacked, half-burned. Then my light caught a trapdoor near what might have been the altar. My pulse quickened. A fresh lock and chain held it shut, but the wood around the lock looked weak. I found a piece of metal debris and pried at the lock. The wood splintered. Eventually, I forced the trapdoor open. The smell that billowed out was rank, damp earth, rot, and something else. I gagged, but forced myself to descend rickety steps into the gloom. My flashlight revealed a small cellar. Shelves lined the walls, containing old jars, random trinkets, and what looked like personal items, wallets, phones, jewelry. I realized with dawning horror these must belong to previous guests. One dusty phone looked newer than mine. I picked it up, tried powering it on, dead. I rummaged, finding IDs from people who must have come here over the years. Shaking, I aimed my flashlight at the far corner. Human bones scattered. Some still had scraps of cloth or rotting flesh. I bit my lip, stifling a scream. Kira had told the truth. They fed outsiders to something. I needed to get out of there. Then I noticed a painting on the wall. It was half torn, the paint faded, but it depicted a woman that looked unsettlingly like me. The date in the corner read 1960. Impossible. Footsteps above made me freeze. Voices muffled. I clicked off my flashlight, pressing myself against the damp wall. Light from a lantern flickered through the trapdoor. I recognized Jonah's voice, then Marlene's. They were chanting something in a language I didn't recognize. My heart thundered in my ears. The chanting grew louder, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. A deep, resonant hum filled the cellar, as if something massive was shifting underground. A horrifying realization seized me. The buried husband is real, or at least they believe it is, and it's right beneath us. The soil at my feet pulsed, or so it felt. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. Jonah's voice said, "He's almost fully awake, we need the offering." Another voice, possibly that wiry man, responded, "She's close." The child saw her. A pause. "She'll come to the chapel eventually." I heard footsteps moving away. My mind raced. I had to escape before they came back with more people. I clicked my flashlight on, scanning for an exit deeper into the cellar. The only opening was a narrow tunnel on one side, half caved in. I squeezed through, coughing from the damp. The earth walls pressed close, every step a risk of collapse. After a short distance, the tunnel turned sharply. My flashlight flickered. Then it revealed a rancid pit. Water dripped from the ceiling, swirling in a shallow depression that churned with black sludge. A horrific shape shifted in the sludge, something large, half-submerged. I stifled a scream and backpedaled. The shape rippled, releasing a breath that sounded like a hollow moan. Something brushed my ankle. I almost fell, but scrambled backward into the tunnel. My flashlight died. Panic overwhelmed me. I crawled in darkness until my hand found a section of broken wood. Another trapdoor? I felt around, found a latch. By some miracle, it opened, letting in a sliver of moonlight. I emerged in the orchard, the gnarled fruit trees looming overhead. Gasping for air, I realized the orchard was next to the barn. The chanting from the chapel had stopped. I had to get out, but how? Then I spotted the shape of my airstream, towed onto the property near the orchard. My heart soared. If I could at least get the propane tanks or something, I could create a distraction. Keeping low, I crept toward the RV. No lights were on in the farmhouse. As I neared the airstream, I saw a fresh scratch of paint across its side and the door swung open. Inside, it was as wrecked as before, but the propane stove and the metal fuel canisters were intact. I rummaged for a lighter. My plan, admittedly insane, was to blow a hole in something, maybe the barn or the chapel, and run while the cult was disoriented. As I stepped out, my foot caught on something in the dirt. It was a small crocheted doll, half buried. I recognized the braids. It looked like Kira in doll form. I stuffed it in my pocket for no rational reason other than not wanting to see it on the ground. Then I glimpsed Kira herself standing by the orchard's edge, motioning for me to follow. She led me silently toward the barn. I had no trust left for these people, but Kira's expression was sad, almost apologetic. She mouthed, "This way." I went after her, trying not to question my own sanity. She stopped at a large patch of bare earth next to the barn. "They'll take you soon," she whispered, eyes wide. "At the festival. You have to hurt him so he can't chase you." My mouth went dry. "Hurt who?" She just stared at the ground. "He's under here, waiting." Thunder boomed in the distance, or maybe it was another subterranean shift. I heard voices approaching. Jonah, Marlene, maybe more. They carried lanterns, flickers of light dancing among the orchard trees. Kira vanished again. I was alone, cornered. I crouched behind the barn, clutching the propane canister. The group came into view. Jonah leading, Marlene behind, the wiry man, and a few others I didn't know. They circled that patch of bare earth. Jonah raised a shovel and sank it into the dirt, chanting. The ground trembled. A hideous shape began to rise, an earthen mound that cracked open as though a giant hand was pushing from beneath. A stench of decay hit my nostrils. They were summoning the buried husband. This was my last chance. I fumbled with the propane canister's valve, letting out a hiss of gas. I yanked the lighter from my pocket. Before I could flick it, Jonah spotted me. He shouted, pointing. The cult rushed toward me. Mustering every shred of courage, I lit the lighter. The flame sparked. I hurled the canister as close as I dared to the shifting mound, hoping the gas would ignite. The canister clanked on the ground, spewing fuel. A second later, it exploded, fire blossoming. The force threw me backward. My ears rang. One or two of the cultists screamed, swallowed by the blaze. Amid the swirling dust and flame, the mound collapsed. A deafening roar shook the air, like an enormous beast in pain. I scrambled up, ignoring the pain in my side. The explosion had set part of the barn on fire. Shadows moved erratically. I saw Jonah lying on the ground, missing a chunk of his leg. Marlene wailed over him. The wiry man thrashed, face burned. The entire orchard glowed red with flame. I grabbed a second small propane canister I'd stashed and staggered toward the truck parked in front of the farmhouse. Maybe it still had keys in it or was workable. I heard someone behind me, struggling to stand. I whirled around, brandishing my lighter. It was Old Man Harlan, stepping out of the darkness, leaning on a cane. His good eye looked desperate. "You hurt him," he hissed. "But he's not done. Run. The roads might open now that he's wounded." I blinked. "Harlan, you're part of this?" He shook his head. "I tried to warn you, I tried to give you the salt, but I can't break the cycle." Then he gave me a shove. "Go!" I stumbled away, not looking back. Thick smoke filled the air. I reached the old truck, the same battered pickup I'd stolen earlier, maybe recovered by them. The engine was still warm. I climbed in, found the key in the ignition. By some miracle, it turned over. I floored it, driving through the orchard, crushing small trees if I had to. Fire and smoke enveloped the farmland. I glimpsed the half-burned chapel spitting sparks. People screamed for help. My memory of the next few hours is fractured. I drove until the road looped, turned, and shifted under me. I refused to stop, even when I saw duplicates of the same bullet-riddled sign. The sky changed from night to near dawn in what felt like a blink. My body ached, ears rang, eyes watered. Finally, the terrain gave way to a winding highway. A legitimate, modern sign indicated Mitchell was 15 miles east. My phone buzzed with a faint signal. I laughed hysterically, half in delirium. In Mitchell, I collapsed at a small cafe, babbling about a cult and a demon in Dry Creek Valley. The cafe owner let me use a phone to call the police. When they arrived, they looked baffled. They said Dry Creek was mostly abandoned farmland. They humored me, sending out a car. Hours later, they came back, saying they found no sign of any active community, just empty land. My Airstream was nowhere to be seen. The orchard, the farmhouse, no sign. Fire damage? They saw none. They concluded I might have gotten lost, hallucinated from dehydration. I spent 2 days in a local clinic recovering. The nurse said I had mild heat stroke, battered ribs, minor burns from the explosion. I tried telling the local sheriff about the subterranean cellar, but he just shook his head. "We've had folks get turned around out there and come back with all kinds of wild stories." He gave me a sad smile as if I were just another unhinged traveler. Eventually, I was released. The sheriff gave me a half-hearted promise to keep an eye out for an old Airstream matching my plates. No one believed me. My story was too bizarre. I've moved on, physically at least. I'm in a new job now, renting a tiny apartment near Bend. But nights still bring me nightmares. I dream of Kira, standing in the orchard, doll-like eyes fixed on me. Or I see the writhing shape of something huge beneath the earth moaning in fury. I'll wake up with my sheets soaked in sweat, convinced that the ground outside is shifting, that the buried husband is crawling closer. I try not to dwell on it, but I can't shake the feeling that the farmland, or the cult, or whatever it was, might still exist in some twisted pocket of reality. Maybe the explosion only wounded that awful thing. Let me slip out during a moment of weakness. What about the next traveler, the next wanderer who takes a wrong turn near Dry Creek? Will they stumble onto that orchard, see the burned chapel, and become the next sacrifice? I wrote down everything here in the hope that someone might read it and be warned. If you see a battered sign for Dry Creek, full of bullet holes, if an old man gives you salt to ward off the harvest winds, or if you meet a silent child named Kira, turn around. Don't stay, don't let them lure you in. And if you hear chanting beneath your feet or feel the ground quake in a place where it shouldn't, run as fast as you can. Because once you're in Dry Creek Valley, time and reality twist into knots, and something hungry waits under the soil, fed by the kindness of strangers.